All right, there we go. Hector Roos, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Man, I'm really excited to have you on the show, man. We were talking a little bit before we started recording. I mean, you're in, one of the biggest races in the country right now. I mean, I think all eyes are on Florida, in large part because of DeSantis and kind of the following that he's gotten over the past, I don't know, year and a half or so. But how has the campaign trail been treating you so far? How have you found, that campaigning has been in a state like Florida, in a race like that? I mean, I'm wondering just how the experience has been so far for you.
So I've helped out a lot of campaigns over the last, you know, 13, 14 years. This is the first time I run for office, so I'm seeing it from a different perspective. Honestly, my entrance into the race was a little late. So, we had to make a decision about, whether we were going to run a candidate or not. And, if it was a year, if a year ago or a year and a half ago, we probably would have made a different decision. But, fast forward and you see, the national red flag laws were passed by Congress, and that was based on the Florida red flag laws. You see taxes, inflation crisis, and really we have a property insurance crisis in Florida that's increasing on top of the inflation, right? That's increasing the cost of living so much for people in Florida that there's speculation that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to have lose their homes for foreclosure because they just can't afford it anymore.
Mm.
Energy costs are going up, so people, it's north of 300% in just a couple months. So I always say the example of people in the chair of the Libertarian Party of Florida, got a bill for like $700 in 1 month for his electricity bill, and he doesn't live in a big house. So
Oh my
it's
God.
other people are seeing it too. I'm at least paying like another $100 more than I would the year before. So it's hitting people on different levels in different ways, and really the answer from the Republican led Florida government with Governor Ron DeSantis has been just silence. They've promised to do things, but it'll be like, oh, we'll do it next year, or that sort of thing, we're serious about helping you guys, but psych, and seriously, I mean, the governor at least has at this point made at least one public statement, like a press conference announcing that he was going to have this like a special legislative session to resolve all these issues. And a month later, it didn't happen, and we're almost, we're about 9 weeks to the election. So it's not basically not going to happen. And that's sad because a lot of this crisis that we're living in terms of cost of living, everybody around the country is feeling it. In Florida, we're just feeling it a different way because we don't really, our average income is median income is less than other states, so we feel it. Floridians feel it a little bit more. So it's just sad that that's what the elections turned into. Is this really reminds me of the old 92 election for president, where you had a Republican and a Democrat, asking for people's votes, and then you had this independent candidate, Ross Perot, saying, you're forgetting the people in the middle. You're forgetting the people who have to make a living, and
Right.
it's the economy, stupid, right? As that big saying back then, and I think this is what this election's turned into. So exciting to see that we're in the right. We have a candidate. I'm not the only candidate on the statewide ballot. We also have Dennis Misagoy, who's running for U.S. Senate, that I
Yes.
actually had to join him. I'm joining him on the campaign trail because he's been running for more than a year. And it's we are holding the line both on foreign policy and domestic policy. And I feel that like the timing for us couldn't be better, but it also means that unfortunately the timing couldn't be worse for Floridians. And but you feel it. You see people trying to put together what this all means. Ultimately, you have some people. The governor has really been buoyed by the mainstream media. He's definitely more popular outside of Florida than he is inside of Florida. Because just people that see it differently because of how the media portrays it. But realistically, the polls are showing that the governor's approval rating is slipping under 50%. Never a good sign. We have to remember that this is a governor who was elected only because he was endorsed by Donald Trump in his first, in the first midterm years of his election after his the 2016 election, and even now, many people really didn't know him that well. He barely won against a much poorer candidate on the Democratic side that went to less. I think he won by less than a quarter of a percent. So these elections, I mean, a libertarian does matter in these elections. These issues matter, and we're not going to let Democrats and Republicans ignore these issues. These are bread and butter issues, and frankly, I'm disappointed in Democrats that they haven't been a stronger opposition party. But then again, it leaves the opportunity for libertarians to come in and be that opposition. Why don't they oppose DeSantis? Or the Republicans? Because they mostly agree with one another. They're all playing this cultural Marxism program out there and trying to gin people up and get them upset about everything else but what's important. So here's where we are in the lay of the land.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Dennis, and I think it's really awesome. I think Florida has one of the strongest libertarian tickets this time around. I mean, he's like you said, he's been out there campaigning for a while, and you've hopped into the race for governor. I mean, it's really awesome to see two strong libertarian candidates both on the ticket at the same time, and it's really good to hear that you guys are campaigning with one another and getting out there. It seems that at least in my mind, Florida seems like a place where a libertarian message would do really well, especially when you're looking at, an incumbent governor like DeSantis. I mean, is that what you've found since you've been campaigning? I mean, are voters really, resonating with that libertarian message?
Yeah, and it's true on both sides of the aisle or perspective or ideology. You had a Democratic primary that finished up on August 23rd. Uh,
Hmm.
the former Republican governor Charlie Crist, who's now served 3 terms in Congress as a Democrat, he wants to present himself as a fresh face, but he defeated basically the homegrown Democrat elected leader who won on without the support of the political establishment. This is Nikki Fried on the
Right.
issue of medical marijuana and basically this idea of bodily autonomy. Right, you can put whatever you want in your body, and you don't need permission from government. And then seeing all her votes that you wonder where are they going to go, but naturally that's a libertarian message. So we can certainly reach out to Democrats who feel that this idea of you know you should decide what you're able to put into your own body for health reasons, particularly as well as recreational reasons. Anything that is an idea that we can promote on the on the on the right or towards conservatives. People really are upset still that school boards just recently unmasked in March. This was from a lot of parents were very upset and went to the school boards in different places in Florida,
Hmm.
and they made a lot of noise to the extent that the FBI put out a formal statement calling them all domestic terrorists. So, you know,
Golly.
lo and behold, I mean, last night, everyone was called basically a domestic terrorist. So from Biden's inaugural speech on the lawn, that maybe reminded me of V for Vendetta. But this is
Oh
all
yeah.
yeah, this is all
Yeah.
cultural. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all cultural Marxism because nobody's paying attention to these, bread and butter issues. Yeah. So we have the opportunity.
I didn't I didn't listen to Biden's speech the other night. I did see all the memes from from the background he was speaking in front of, and I think the V for Vendetta comparison is pretty accurate. Did he really call, like, what exactly did he say, in calling people fascist? I didn't listen to the speech at all.
So in other words, he was being critical of people who didn't agree with him, saying that he was losing his patience with them, and the fact that that he was trying to how do you say the expression is intimidate. He was trying to intimidate people on the who didn't who obviously didn't agree with him, right? So
Right.
when you look at that, he basically these are the steps that we're all concerned about in terms of criminalizing dissent, right? So that
Right.
that people who don't agree with him are extremists, and that if you express an extreme way of thinking, there's going to be ramifications. Of course, it's all nebulous. It's not anything specific or concrete. But we've seen the direction that we've seen the direction that this government has been going towards, and unfortunately, it was like that also under Trump. But Trump didn't really control his own government either. So we've been just living under this bureaucratic regime that is trying to stifle dissent any which way. I mean, frankly, if they can do it to a sitting president, they can do it to any of us.
Oh, absolutely. I know I know there's been some stuff come out about Charlie Crist's running mate. Um, I guess she was the head of the teachers union down there, and they pulled up some different different tweets of hers, different clips of her talking about I mean, pretty much saying the same thing about the people that were going to the school board meetings and everything like that. Just demonizing them and making them out to be I mean, essentially, comparing them and calling them domestic terrorists, just for going to a school board meeting and voicing their concerns. I mean, that just seems that's crazy to me. How did how did we get to a point like that where, concerned parents wanting to express their concerns to the school board, which, which would be the appropriate place to do it, are now being called domestic terrorists and everything else. I mean, how did we even get to a point like this? It just seems so. It would have seemed unthinkable years ago, but now it's just so commonplace.
You want me to tell you the truth, or you want me to give you a political answer?
I want the truth.
I hope you and your listeners can handle the truth, because the reality is that we've been not we, but the public, right, has been entertaining this debate about school choice, right?
Hmm.
Everyone's heard about school choice. So the reality is that it used to be called parental rights. So when you changed it from parental rights to school choice, then what if you didn't agree with it suddenly changed from we are accountable to parents to if you don't like it, GTFO, right?
Hmm.
And go to your school of choice. In other words, that is what happened. The people have lost the right to hold these school boards accountable because the oxygen that was sucked up in the room was directed toward if you don't like it, choose something else. So that's really where we're at. And the reality is that that has been something that we're now pushing back on, because you don't have to live that way. We don't have to go. How do we say this? We don't have to uh, make it difficult for us to go through this entire process, find something else to some other type of education for our children, if we're literally paying for the service that we're supposed to have for our children, right? No
Right.
matter what, in Florida, we have obligatory property taxes that pay into a fund that pays for public education in Florida. It's enshrined in the Florida Constitution that the government is responsible for providing adequate education for children.
Hmm.
So, I mean, maybe I have to repeat that because it's not an absurd comment to say. So, what does it mean that we go from parental rights to school choice? That really the difference is government involvement. So in this case, we went, the reason why parental rights was the most important step is because basically it meant that the last person who had the right to say anything about how the child's education happened should be the parents. When you switch to school choice, now it's government gives you these options for you to choose from. You choose it. We'll let you choose one of these, but these are the ones that we approve for you. So there's a model of government co-parenting there that is insidious. That whether you're on the right or whether you're on the left, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, is something that is defended by both sides against parents. So that's really where it comes back from. That is really the truth of how we got to this point where even speaking up in school boards as a parent is now seen as something divisive when it's used to be something normal. And it didn't always be that way. I think in Florida, it really started changing after the 2014, 2016 elections, when school choice really started becoming this wedge issue, because
Right.
then you're focusing not on the quality of the education, not on the parents' right to choose, but on whether or not government would give you that choice or not. Whether you're picking basically a politician who sides with school choice groups versus teachers unions, right? So
Right.
it's really become a political question, not a question of values. That's really where it comes down to.
So so how would how would Florida return to a more, you know, an education model that is parent centric? I mean, how would I mean, is it as simple as, getting the state government to remove their influence from, from this issue? Or how would you as governor, sort of try to fix,
So
this particular issue?
it's a good question. And so the libertarian approach for parental rights is returning decision making back to teachers, administrators, and parents, right?
Hmm.
It takes a village, in other words, to raise a child, and that's always been the paradigm in public education. Now, now that there are different types of public education, of course. You not simply curriculum-based education, which is what people typically think about when they look at a public school. You have
Hmm.
the charters, public charters. You have these specialty schools like magnet programs, and there are others. The point is that each of them are you don't have to have we how to say this. So giving it back to the teachers to have the flexibility, giving it back to the parents to work with the teachers, because right now we have public policy that's been put in place by Republicans in the state legislature of Florida, signed by the governor, that creates division between them. So,
Mm.
for example, the famous "Don't Say Gay" bill that Democrats called it, which was formerly called the Parental Rights in Choice Act, to that effect. I mean, it's a misnomer, right? And it's never really about what they call it. So really, what they did with that law was, the whole basis of it was, hey, if you're we're not going to let you teach anybody under fourth grade about the birds and the bees, about sexuality, about any of that. Period. Whether you have permission of parents or not, it's just not going to be allowed. Fine. Now they did that, but again, it's an intervention that literally took the choice away from parents and created a gotcha system for teachers. If a student actually asks a question about this topic, then a teacher's not allowed to say anything about it. Go ask your parent. Go do this. So do that. And they accidentally do mention something about it. They could be dismissed under that law. They can be sued. A lot of things could happen under. There's a lot of redress under that law that creates more friction in the classroom and in the teacher parent environment. So that's really where really what we should be doing. We should be devolving this back into the teacher parent relationship, rather than having it focused on the politics and the school choice versus the teachers union. And ultimately, the teachers union doesn't care about teachers' rights. They just care about their political influence, right? Or the way a
Right.
teacher independence to work with parents. They don't care. If they did this, we wouldn't have to argue about school choice because the teachers could be open to choose. In fact, in Florida, a Democrat 25 years ago had a has uh, signed a law into a law that allowed parents and teachers to join together to to have basically a trigger election. They can trigger elections to take schools independent. So if you don't like your school board, if you don't like the politics of it, if you want to empower parents and teachers in the way I just described, then shoot, you can just do it on your own. You can trigger an election if a majority of teachers and parents agree, school goes independent. You have your own governing board, and you get your own funding. I mean, but no one wants to talk about it in Florida because it distracts from the issue of the school politics of who controls this pot of money, who can use these as wedge issues in politics. And I'm telling you, people are getting people are really using school choice these days as a wedge issue in for politicians to win narrow elections. So Florida, it comes up in Florida because it's demonstrated that you can win on elections on this issue alone.
Yeah. Now that law you mentioned right there sounds super interesting. Is that? I mean, is that a power that's been used in Florida in the
We have
past a lot, like
uh,
to trigger those elections, or?
unfortunately not. We have maybe three or four governing board schools like that. So that's the problem with it. That we wish we could do more. We could have more, but if it's usually teachers union reps that don't want it to happen.
Mm,
I can tell you that I'm quietly pursuing the support of a teachers union, and teachers and parents in particular schools where they're underrepresented, by the school district itself. I mean, there are
mhm,
places where it's ideal like that, right? Where even the teachers, even the teachers in the teachers union, not on the big scale, but on the local scale, may want to participate in this kind of law.
that's interesting. I really, huh?
I'm going to pull up the statute right now. So, give me a second.
Okay, yeah, no, that would be no. That's really interesting. I hadn't. I don't. I'd never heard of a law like that. That it seems. It seems like a really cool power for them to have.
Right. I'm happy that the legislature hasn't actually done anything to pull it back. It could have made it better and easier to use, but
Right.
the reality is that we have we just the politics wants to go elsewhere. So in other words, there's if you created all these new independent governing schools or independent districts, then it's taken away from the reason why public charter schools should exist, and they do work on a profit model, like a for-profit model. So you're basically taking money away from people.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, so there is a reason why that it hasn't necessarily happened.
But it's been on the books for like 25 years. You say?
At least 25 years back when
Wow.
Charlie Crist was a Republican, they actually modified it to make it somewhat stronger.
Mm. I wonder if that's probably not something he would champion now, being a being a Democratic nominee and having a teachers union head as
Right.
his
It's
running mate. I assume.
I'll get to that in a moment, but I found the law specifically reads Florida Parent Empowerment Law. Also, Florida Statute 1002.33, and then Section 3. But there's three schools in Florida that have been converted anywhere. So that from last time I checked, people want more information. There's a guy here down in my community in Miami that tried to do it for his school, and he's basically created a website where he hosts his story and how to make this happen. He failed in his trigger election,
Hmm.
the documentation is pretty good, and his website is parentguardianshipschool.com. So it's fairly straightforward process. Now, as for teachers unions, they are it is an influence game at the teachers union level, especially at the higher level, and they basically delivered a lot of votes for Charlie Crist over
Hmm.
his Democrat opponent in the primary, Nikki Fried, and he won decidedly at 60-40. So if it was a payback for that, I can certainly understand why he recruited this union boss basically. And frankly, I'm in Miami myself, and I'm looking at what they're doing, and there's also a calculation play there that they think that they can get teachers, which there's probably about good 50,000, 60,000 teachers in Miami-Dade County, where the running mate's a union boss of, and they're pushing for a one-time tax to pay teachers more. It's a supplement, right? So it's going to be on the ballot also in November, and and she's the union boss has been pushing this, and so the idea is that, hey, join the team, make some more money, and there's so many teachers that participate, that are represented by that union. They feel that that alone might be the silver bullet to winning the election, being that there's been most of these elections, statewide elections for governor, are very tight. They're usually under 1%. 1%, 1% can be any. I mean, DeSantis was elected by less than a quarter of a percent, which was about 38,000 votes. So
Right.
you can see that there's a lot of room there for this kind of strategy to work out. And obviously, it's not the only school. That's not the only county that is that has a school board, a teacher union backed referendum to, or tax referendum, right, to create a supplement payment for teachers who are, in Florida, they are underfunded for the most part.
Mm.
You can always tell. Just put it to you this way, and I think in some of these countries in Europe, they pay teachers like three times more in effect to what they pay in the United States. So, and in
Right.
some of the southern countries, they pay, sorry, some of the states in the South, they pay teachers even less. So it goes to show, where, what is actually how our resources being allocated. And frankly, I do believe that there is well, there's it's not a problem with school funding. It's a problem of school districts allocating funding to teacher pay. I think they're purposely creating the situation too to keep the politics going, because politicians thrive on this type of conflict, that they can always kick the can down the road, promise things, and they keep promising things to fix it when they come back for re-election. Just one more term. I just need another 4 years to fix this issue.
Hmm.
How many times have we heard that from a politician?
An endless amount of times.
Right. They don't want to do the work. They're not built to do the work. Our political process doesn't reward work.
No, I think you're absolutely right. If you if you fixed all the issues you said you were going to fix, I mean, what would you run on in reelection? You just it. I mean, you're absolutely right. It really benefits people to just keep, kind of keep the status quo and keep harping about the same issues they've been harping about for years and years and years. And it's the everyday person that gets the shaft. Like they don't. They're stuck with these same choices that they get every year, pretty much. And I mean, I think that's why so many people, in recent years have started looking towards, the Libertarian Party. I mean, the Party is hotter than it's ever been, and it's because people are so fed up with their choices. And I want to backtrack just a little bit. I'm curious as to, how you first got involved in politics, and how you first got involved with the Libertarian Party.
Good question. So I had been an early Ron Paul supporter, and I mean early does not mean 1988. I mean 2007. And
Okay.
I was one of those guys who learned about libertarianism through his example, through his speeches, through his debates. I definitely was there live to watch the Giuliani moment between him and Dr. Paul. I served on both campaigns, and ultimately, we as a movement, after those campaigns, it's kind of like, well, what do you do next, right? So I wasn't too actively involved in the movement. I still did a lot of work in the political scene, helped a lot of candidates. I worked with a lot of consulting firms, and just developed the tool set for how politics are put together, and increase what they call operational you know it, understanding of politics. So
Hmm.
it wasn't really until the 2020 election that I was looking and lockdowns and the pervasive and tax increases, and I already lost faith in the Republican Party, that they were anything, that they were a minarchist organization, that all they wanted to do is tweak tax rates, but they still wanted, just wanted to settle for lesser increases of spending, lesser increases of taxes. They wanted to control people's options in any parts of the market, whether it was healthcare or education. And frankly, I 2020 came around, lockdowns happened, and my distaste at that point was already had already reached a breaking point when I saw that there was no pushback, relatively little pushback regarding this idea that and frankly, it was a Republican administration that started the lockdowns, right?
Right. Right.
uh, there very little pushback. Obviously the mandates, that we're going through live through a course of mandates. The Democrats, weren't opposing any of that, and so frankly, and ultimately we've seen in Florida is this kind of decline of 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 the political scene, the public debate, where where Democrats and Republicans are walking such hand in hand that they have nothing really to oppose each other on, and they keep playing this cultural Marxism game where they want to call somebody, they want to call each other out on some kind of cultural issue, even if it's happening in another state. Like, well, without getting into an example, uh, and then ultimately, I had to make a choice. I was doing some interviews back then on different community platforms, and I started interviewing other libertarians for office, and people representing the local parties. And I made a choice ultimately to switch over once I started hearing about this group within the Libertarian Party called the Mises Caucus that was basically calling people who are libertarians, just not in the Libertarian Party. There are a lot more libertarians that just that are not in the Libertarian Party than there are in the Libertarian Party by large.
Right.
And they were just calling people back to, hey, this Libertarian Party thing, it's called the Libertarian Party. They were silent during COVID. They were silent in 2020. They didn't say anything about lockdowns or mandates or push back against really this totalitarian moment that we've lived in our lives. And ultimately, I said, well, what's the plan after that? Well, we're going to run someone who basically is as knowledgeable of the issues and as dynamic as a Ron Paul, but like a younger Ron Paul. I said, wow, that sounds like a great idea. We can really pursue these messaging the way we want to without having to deal with the at the end of the day, these political parties are private clubs, right? So,
Right.
back in the Ron Paul days, there was attempts to do something similar in the Republican Party that just fell flat in its face because it's a private club. So if they can change the rules whenever they want. And in the Libertarian Party, it was easier just to say we're going to take over the whole shebang and really restore it back to its roots, right? So in other words, this little to no government roots where government is not intervening on every aspect of our lives, and where we do have where government does exist, it's not done so in a way that is intrusive or manipulative or coercive. More importantly, that you have to do what they say or at the point of a gun, right?
Right.
You're entering into a relationship because with the government because you want to, and be and that's a much different story than what we've been living in under COVID and under the lockdowns for 2 years. I mean, and frankly, I mean that's my journey. I joined the state board of the Libertarian Party. I'm the chair of the candidates committee for the Libertarian Party of Florida. And ultimately, I looked around and we had this great guy named Dennis Misagoy who's running for U.S. Senate. We've had a number of other candidates who are running for Congress on the November ballot as well. And I'm in charge of recruiting all these candidates for local office. And I see the biggest office that we have, the governor, isn't being met. And people have expressed opinions about it, but there's been this interesting pushback about, well, we don't want to offend DeSantis because maybe he'll do what we say if we ask him nicely to give us back our freedoms or keep our freedoms, yeah, protect our freedoms. But if you have to beg at this point, it's not a sovereign relationship to someone who is. You've turned the relationship between a voter uh, and a politician around, or a sovereign to a servant around, right? So
Mm.
now we have to act like the servants or the slaves and beg for our rights. No, our rights are inalienable. That's what our faith said, our credos, our founding fathers have established. That's what's in our founding documents, whether it's the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. These rights are fundamental. We don't have to beg for them. We just live them. So that's where ultimately, there was still quite a bit of pushback. If I was saying I wanted to run a year and a half ago, this conversation would have been way different. But ultimately, spring forward, what changed was ultimately you start seeing the Democrat-controlled Congress, U.S. Congress, basically use Florida's laws, such as red flag laws, as basically a model for their red flag laws nationally, and they're going basically testing, through Republican-controlled Florida government. They're testing policies that any Democrat or led led government would espouse themselves as a model for the rest of the country. And at that point, and you don't see any pushback from leadership, from Republican leadership, you have to say, there's really nothing to lose, because we're getting the same policies that if Democrats were running Florida, as if when Republicans are running it. So what's the point? There's no difference.
Right.
And so we really don't have anything to lose in Florida. We have everything to gain, because ultimately the purpose of campaigns, is if is one of two things: either win or gain influence. That is, expand the culture, take the issues to task, contrast, recruit. I mean, by and far, if anything's true, it's this: that campaigns or candidates are the number one recruiters for political parties, no, and political movements generally. It's the candidates, not these issues out there. They want people want to see other people stand up and be assertive on the issues they believe and they can prove are right. And
Right.
that's at the heart of this campaign. That is the first and foremost goal of this campaign. Whether Ron DeSantis wins re-election, or loses, that's up to voters who decide to choose him, over me, or Charlie Crist, who's a former Republican wanting to run for I think it's his fifth time running for governor, in his third political party.
Damn, it's his fifth time running for governor. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
he ran like 5 times, 3 times for under Republican. He ran once as an independent, and this is his first time as a Democrat.
Damn, you guys just can't get rid of him. He just keeps coming back in a different colored cloak.
Yeah,
I think you said something real interesting there, though, is that there's more libertarians outside of the party than there are in it, and I can't remember who I was talking to. It might have been Dan Berman, but we were talking about how we feel that libertarianism is the default setting for most people. I mean, most people just kind of want the government to leave them alone, and they can do whatever they want to do. But voters feel trapped in the duopoly. Like they feel like they have to vote Democrat or Republican, for their vote to matter. That's what you hear a lot of people say. They don't want to throw their vote away on an independent or a third party candidate. But you know, I think just over the past couple of years, more people have kind of thrown that logic to the side, realizing that the two parties that they've been propping up this whole time just are not representing their best interest whatsoever. And like you've been saying, not only are they not representing the voters' interests, they're actually coordinating with one another to enact policies that don't really do anything except oppress voters. And I think you're absolutely right. Candidates and campaigns are the biggest recruiter for parties, and I think that's something that it's crucial for the Libertarian Party and Libertarian candidates to understand. It's like the base of voters that you have to work with is way bigger than anyone would realize. I think, um, and it's just I don't know, and that's why I think it's important to run like really strong candidates. Like I said before, I think Florida has a really awesome libertarian ticket this time around. I think New York has a really good libertarian ticket this time around. Um, and you mentioned that you are in charge of recruiting libertarian candidates for office there in Florida, right?
yes.
So what does that process entail? How do you go about doing that exactly? I'm really interested.
So the first thing is I'll point out to you this way: the reason why politics is generally so messed up in America is, people said it this way. Basically, we have an older group of an aging out leadership. The average age in Congress, for instance, is well over 70 years old.
Oh yeah.
The oldest member of the Senate is Chuck Grassley. He's 92, or maybe 93 at this point. Nancy Pelosi's in her upper 70s. The current president of the United States is what, 82, 83, something to that effect.
I'm not sure. I think he's around 80. I'm not exactly sure where at, but he's around there.
Right. So he's 79 actually. He, he,
Okay.
he looks a lot old. So The point is that so you have these people who are holding back other generations from serving in public life, and they just kind of held this monopoly on political control. To a certain extent, it's been said that Gen X has completely been skipped over from political participation. So now, Florida looks like they're going to elect the first millennial member of Congress, who's going to be a Democrat out of the Orlando area. I mean, that's for the first time, and no Gen Xers. There are very few little Gen Xers that got that chance to do so. So
Mm,
this is true as you go down in government, in levels of government where it's less competitive. If it's like if you're outside of an urban area where there's and competitive means like there's who wants to really invest a lot of time and effort in a government that doesn't control a lot of things like a big budget, big taxi districts or a port or an airport, or you have something big like a big population. So beyond outside of those areas, it's not competitive at all. I mean, it's basically no one wants to get in there. You have the same people with the same. There's very little turnover. People often get elected without any opposition. So there's no
mhm.
elections whatsoever. Some people will just get elected once and they never get have to face another election for 10 or 20 years. And the average age is over 70. So, recruiting candidates for the Libertarian Party really is at minimal. Are you good moral character? Do you understand what a libertarian is? And do you live in any of these areas? And if you don't, well, would you like to move? You know, the reality comes down to is our elected we have elected officials in nonpartisan seats from special taxing districts to city commissions of sizable cities. We even have a mayor. But that's still we just need to keep building on these numbers, and building on these numbers is really the task of the committees themselves. You create a list of people who are even interested in running for office, or supporting other candidates, and you just start creating a pipeline. And we have 400 municipalities in the state of Florida, 67 counties. I mean, 67 school boards. There's some school boards that you can get elected with like 500 votes. Kid you not. And there's some that you do need like 10,000 votes, and a
Right.
lot of them are like that. And some of them are countywide where you need 200,000 votes. So it's a different game for each situation, but there's not as the smaller the race, the less competitive it is, and that's really where our resources and our talent can be best focused. But again, an election like governor or U.S. Senate or something statewide uh, is uh, is a megaphone for the movement. So you can't put down the megaphone either. You know, you have to do what you can. Um, you know, I would also be remiss is that there's different strategies for running for big elections. You know,
Mhm.
one is I tend to support weaponizing what's called the spoiler effect. The spoiler effect basically means that if you're in a state where the elections are close, statewide elections are close, then you can have an oversized impact on the election by basically receiving more votes than the spread between the top two candidates. So someone who's done this a number of times, who's been called a spoiler, is in Georgia, and I'm trying to remember his name right now. It's getting my mind. But in Georgia, with the Libertarian candidate there has run for U.S. Senate. Now he's running for Florida governor. I'm sorry, for Georgia governor.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, we have to feel that we have a seat at the table because we can say you're not paying attention to this issue. This is why you're losing this election, not because we're simply on the ballot, because people are expressing their preference, right? So
Right.
that's really what it comes down to it. Now, I do want
Mm,
to mention a quote by Alexander Hamilton, which is centered to which is centered to well, let me double back real quick.
mhm.
That this is the effect of recruiting candidates, and what the strategies are for the Libertarian Party as a minor as a the third party that's sitting behind the big two, which is we are trying to espouse the issue that we're giving people a choice. We're giving people an ability to choose their preference, to choose their conscience, and not vote against their own conscience. So, in other words, we are trying to highlight to people that standing opposition means that we are giving people a choice. Otherwise, they're left with just the biggest lie in politics, which is that good people, good character have to they are obligated somehow. to voting for the lesser evil.
Mm.
Now, that you want to talk about lawlessness, imagine everybody voting against their basic morals, morality, and conscience constantly, and you're going to see moral decay in the country. And guess what? We're there, right?
Oh
That's
yeah.
what's happened. So now to the Alexander Hamilton quote. So founding father Alexander Hamilton explained this explained this way back then too as a principle. His quote is, "If we have an enemy at the head of government, let it be one whom we can oppose and for whom we are not responsible." I'll read it again. If we must have an enemy at the head of government, let it be one whom we can oppose and for whom we are not responsible.
Mm.
So at the end of the day, we don't, if you want to support, issues and you feel like Republicans are like Florida example, right? We have Republican controlled legislator, we have a Republican as governor, and yet they act like Democrats. And it's harder to stand up to these statists, for lack of a better word, because then you're dealing with somebody. People feel like they can't oppose them because, oh, at least their talking points are good, right? But that's
Right.
making us responsible for their conduct, and that is something that we have to get away from. It's far better to have, instead of defensive voting, defensive. So people would characterize defensive voting as, well, voting for the lesser two evils, or the other way, which is vote your conscience. If the worst character uh, gets in, but you have a strong check on them from like a legislature, then that's a preferred situation than having a unilateral government where everybody's on the same, supposedly on the same team, but you're getting an even worse outcome. Basically, what we've had for too long in Florida is Republicans have been governing, and they put people to sleep, right? They put them into this false sense of security that they'll defend their freedoms, they'll keep their taxes low, they'll keep their cost of living down, and rather instead they've been governing like, we're going to increase the taxes have been increased 4 years, in 4 years they've increased four times. They have obviously restricted gun ownership or Second Amendment, or right to self defense, both in
Mm-hmm.
terms of by raising the age of to purchase a firearm to 21, by installing red flag laws, which is simply another form of civil asset forfeiture. Of course, they've expanded civil asset forfeiture, which, if you don't know what that means, it means that basically that you can, a police department, a sheriff's agency can seize your property, any of your property, with the notion that it is involved in a crime, and and you have to go to court in order to ask for it back. Same way with if they seize your firearms because someone accused you, to the police department, who then goes to a judge to just get a warrant that says, we want to see you, I give you permission to seize somebody's guns. So it's all based on, you are presumed guilty before, and you have to prove your innocence. When it's traditionally in American jurisprudence, and as a legal system, is based on you are innocent and have to be proven guilty. And so that is it's we've created a system in a legal system, or that's being forced on us as a arbitrary and capricious uh, manner of politically driven law. So that means that none of our liberties are safe, none of our property is secured, and we've even seen the Supreme Court, which is just basically a group of politically influential attorneys,
Right.
argue that, and try to legalize the notion of uh, of this idea that government can take your property away if it has something to do with the public good, whatever the public good is. Again, arbitrary and capricious. So uh, when it gets down to it, we have to, this idea of us taking responsibility as individuals for our own lives is the most important part of this process. It first starts by just being free to, express your preference. Because if you're not free to express your preference, we're in a much different. That's a much different problem than obviously, culturally speaking, that's a different problem, because then there's no pressure whatsoever on politicians to not do the status thing, to not raise the taxes, to there's no pressure on them whatsoever then. And this is the goal ultimately of what these kind of campaigns. This is The best example of a spoiler has always been uh, the '92 election for president with Ross Perot,
Hmm.
where he said, where he got what, almost 30% of the vote that year, and he had a shot, of course, but the point is that he pivoted, he expressed issues that were being ignored by both parties, and it caused enough people in the election, even if and clearly he got more votes than the difference between the two candidates, and the sitting president lost re-election, and maybe after Ross Perot's famous quote in that election was, "It's the economy, stupid," right?
Right.
Yeah, similarly in Florida, I mean, we have a political establishment that's so arrogant and just comfortable that they've raised taxes, they've let people be concerned about the future of their of home ownership. They basically raised taxes or allowed cost of living to increase so much that
Hmm.
people are wondering whether they're going to be able to afford to stay in their homes. So you create that much uncertainty in people's lives, there should be a reaction. And
Right.
I think the problem with DeSantis these days is that he's expended so much political capital to get to where he's at that he has no he hasn't really his only tool right now is really more cultural Marxism. Let's say it what it is. When you're attacking teachers, you're attacking this, and you're criticizing something things that are happening in other states, or you're spending time criticizing DC when you're not really doing anything, just opening your mouth and saying something, or and you're promising things that won't happen until maybe a year or 2 years later. Ultimately, and you're not fulfilling your campaign promises. Ultimately people are going to realize that. So I think if DeSantis loses, it's really going to be a check of him losing, not because people just don't see any hope in DeSantis turning things around. And frankly, they basically lost confidence in him if they had it in the first place. This
Oh
guy,
yeah.
I mean, DeSantis is the guy who locked down, was one of the first lockdown governors in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And he still somehow gets all the credit for, keeping schools open. And I mean, he's really branded himself, and the mainstream media has branded him like the super pro freedom governor. And I mean, I think just, over the course of this past, almost hour we're approaching on, I think you've made the case that he's not. Um, and we are approaching on an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I did have one more thing I wanted to ask you about, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit here and there, but I think it's important, so I wanted to really emphasize it here towards the end. And it's prominent on your website, the Florida model red flag law. On your website, you listed as a big reason as to why you're running, and you did talk about it a little there just a minute ago. But if you could just break down exactly what that red flag law is, and how it's been used in Florida so far.
Sure. So Florida. So let me start with this. Florida is part of is one of these states in the South. The South, everyone's heard of. If you're in the South, you've heard of the term Jim Crow.
Hmm.
So Jim Crow is a series of post-Reconstruction laws that were designed to basically keep the political establishment in power, to demotivate Northerners from moving to the South, to encourage free black slaves and descendants of black slaves from remaining in the state by taking away ballot access, taking away the right of gun ownership, of self-defense. So this is in, in Florida, particularly. Actually, the modern civil rights movement that people have heard about, in the 50s and 60s, actually did not formally end until the 1980s. And so you still have a lot of people in politics in Florida that belong to the generation where they remember how Jim Crow was in Florida, and you and so and what does that what does that mean? That means actually when you have there was control of political representation in Florida in that manner. Even more recently, there was a Supreme Court decision that showed that there was a state and corporate uh, policies to essentially segregate communities through something called redlining. So it's just saying that this is something that's actually it's something that's not so old in Florida that it can be dismissive. It actually is still part of the landscape. So when you talk about any type of gun control laws, particularly in a state like Florida, you actually have to like you have to go back and remember what this whole history of the civil rights issues have been. By the
Hmm.
way, when the Nazis saw in the 30s saw what Jim Crow was, they went they went holy cow, and they're the ones that said, but we don't even go that far, but that's what you can that's how far you can go with that. That's crazy. Let's just say that's to put it in perspective. I mean, it's colorful, but that's really what it comes down to. So back to red flag laws. Red flag laws specifically are a form of gun confiscation laws.
Hmm.
So, but the uh, let me explain what it is. So specifically, it is it targets. It's supposed to target people with some type of mental disorder or some type of accusation that someone's basically unstable. Doesn't necessarily mean mental illness. Could just be mad, right? And out of control, raging or whatever, right? So it's typically the typical example is a significant other is scared that they get into a fight with their other significant other. They own a lot of guns. The person goes to police, reports that they're fearful for their life and they can't go back home because of all these guns that are in the house. The police goes to just based on that accusation alone, either that the person is mentally disturbed, which could be temporary. They could go to a judge, get a warrant to seize the firearms in the house, and no due process. There's no jury. There's no notice even to the person who's going to be who's the target of this red flag uh, to present themselves and defend themselves in court. So, in other words, the police is just not given the order, arbitrarily gone, and they go to the house, seize the firearms. However that goes down, there's a knock on the door, like if there's any other process of a warrant, and then which could escalate or might not. But either way, the property's seized, and then the person has to actually go to court and argue for them to be returned. His or her property be returned. So in other words, this is basically an administrative process that has no due process. But that's again, it's arbitrary and capricious. It could be applied that way. In fact, there's some counties that's applied several hundred times in a by one single judge can basically write hundreds of these orders in a year, and they have in certain counties in Florida. So
Hmm.
basically, sheriffs there are some sheriffs that literally like do a score. They keep a scorecard of how many of these they've been able to. Republican sheriffs, by the way, how many of them they've been able to serve and process. So how many guns they've seen basically.
God.
So they it's and they think that's something the whole machoism about law enforcement there for you. So let's go back to how this even passed in Florida. So so in 2017, there was we're going back 5 years. In 2017, I'm sitting there, working with a political campaign in the area of a where when a mass shooting event happens at a high school in Parkland, Florida, in Broward County, South Florida,
Hmm.
Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. This is the guy who's the shooter is Nicholas Cruz. He's currently being in trial right now for the murder of 30 plus people, students and adults.
Hmm.
And ultimately, it happened right at the start of it was a Valentine's Day massacre. It happened right at the start of a legislative session, and the Democrats and the national media did all these town halls. They did all this pushing and advocacy. Ultimately, a couple billionaires dropped maybe like $100 million on influencing policy in Florida. There was so much public pressure on them that the legislative leadership said, little quote, "We just held our hands together, we closed our eyes, and we jumped for it." So, just they completely caved into the pressure and the money, and they passed this draconian bill called, the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Act. They just straight up called it like that, and which raised the minimum age to purchase a firearm from 18 to 21. So you could have served your country. It doesn't matter. You can't buy a firearm.
Hmm.
It increased waiting lists for gun purchases, waiting times. It and of course it instituted a red flag law. I think Florida became like only the second or maybe the first actually Republican-led state in the country to actually institute its own red flag law. And it was just so expansive, no checks, no balances on it. That's why it was approved by by Congress in that, almost verbatim. Now the reality is that the how do I say this? The Republican leadership in uh, went so hardcore for it. You are not allowed to oppose it, and you were not allowed to oppose it in subsequent legislative years with even new members of the legislature, because it was such a leadership priority that, in other words, they put politics over principle in such a manner that they lost both, right?
Mm.
So they were never able to actually execute any other politics, any other reforms. They were locked in on gun control, 100%, and they couldn't, even that year and subsequent years. It's basically demoralized and undermined the ability of even small, limited government proponents to do anything in Florida government. So the only minor change I've seen anything happen is really, direct primary care was passed. Whoopee. That was already work that was already happening,
Right.
for years, because sometimes just takes like 6 years to pass anything that important. And all it was, which redefined, all it did was change a word that says that it redefined direct primary care as not insurance. Does it? It's not insurance, so it can't be regulated as insurance. But
Mm.
okay, so back to the main point is that Republicans lost their way in such a hard way in Florida that, in comes Ron DeSantis. He gets elected in 2018 by the president. Ron DeSantis is just picked. He's randomly picked out of obscurity by some political establishment. Hack presented with a ribbon, in a bow, as a gift to Donald Trump. And without much further ado, much more screening, he's pushed to the top of the prime, he's pushed into the governor's mansion basically. So
Mm.
not on any issues, not on any freedom issues. No, nobody really cared about DeSantis, honestly, because everyone knew he was relying on Trump. And then COVID happens. COVID happens again. The Republicans are so weak and uh, in terms of standing for what's right, because they're demoralized or undermined, and frankly, it's a go along to get along system at that point. That Ron DeSantis decides he's going to be one of the first governors to lock down everything, start accepting federal dollars from the moment they come in, because you know what? Someone told him that if he declared the state of emergency, he would be super governor, basically. He would assume dictatorial powers over government, in a manner that no governor in the history of Florida would have, to spend somewhere waywards of what, 40-50 billion dollars that he himself would have unilateral control over. So
Mm.
he did that for 475 days, and he built himself a system that no longer relied on Donald Trump, but now had basically he built up a patronage system where he was now empowering allies and buying off basically support, for his agenda, for his political, developing political machine that he didn't have before because he was relying on Trump again, to establish himself. And he did so, and he's established that, of course, nationally as a result. He went along with it. He bought into it, hook, line, and sinker. He was one of the first governors to do it. Realistically, the only thing he's ever been criticized by the mainstream media or by Democrats is on some of the cultural war issues, the cultural Marxism issues, whether it's him complaining about sex ed being taught or sexuality being taught in schools, or don't say gay bill, or maybe the restriction, somewhat on the restriction of free speech and the right to assembly. He was lightly
Yeah. Yeah.
criticized on. He passed a bill like that, and he signed that bill I think at the end of the spring. And you know what? The reality was that Democrats didn't mind because they liked that kind of stuff. Anyway, you know who the first people who were charged in that law was?
Who's that?
Trump supporters. First people who were charged was Trump supporters in the Space Coast in Volusia County, in sight of
Wow.
NASA. They were they charged them under that, for basically, for putting for standing, for doing a counter protest and being obnoxious and leaving their car in the way of traffic. They were the first ones charged, with it, and
Wow.
that's really what it comes down to. It's never the intention of all this kind of public policy is never intended to affect the people that they say it's going to target. It's only going to target the opposite way. I mean, that's the moral hazard of it. So when I say that, of course, uh, ultimately DeSantis's state of emergency for 475 days empowered all local governments to basically do whatever they wanted to with COVID. So guess what? The public hospital agencies, a lot of the left-leaning or Democrat-run counties and municipalities, they enacted everything from mask mandates to vaccine mandates to noise to what is it, curfews, and they continued lockdowns for through the 2020 election. I'm in Miami, so I saw there were still uh, curfews and mandates of that form all the way through the election of 2020. But ultimately, even the mask mandates weren't reversed in schools until recently, and the vaccine mandates are still in place in public agency hospitals now.
Really?
Yeah. So in other words, if you want to get treated in a public hospital setting, you're going to need to either ask for some kind of religious exemption, or you need to get you need to get jabbed. You know, you need to
Wow.
get the ouchie. So it's not like DeSantis was following Fauci's order. So he was just doing everything but the ouchie. So I call him Fauci without the ouchie. Because really what he really said was, I don't disagree. I don't agree with the recommendation of the CDC and the FDA, because I see these other scientists who are telling me something different. But so I can't justify the lockdowns on my own. So he just let other people make the decision instead. And
Wow.
and for the most part, he had the only reason why after 475 days, it was only a week or two later after that California reopened. And if California reopened and we're still under a state of emergency in Florida, people are going to start asking questions. So that's really what it came down to. And then as a Libertarian Party, as a member of the board of the Libertarian Party of Florida, we were starting to make a lot of noise about that. That we're still, New York is reopening. What's wrong with you? You know,
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, everyone looks at, New York and California as being states that were just so, locked down and, all sorts of mandates and everything, but Florida actually kept that stuff going longer than they did.
we created two types of Floridas: the ones that had it and the ones that didn't. So you were either free in some
Wow.
counties and not free in others. And even now, the reason why parents were so pissed is because after 2 years, their kids were still being masked in school. And obviously, I consider that a form of child abuse. It's almost
Right.
ritualistic. You have to do this, or no reason uh, other than we say so. That's a religion. When you don't have a choice. So and of course, it was only last November again that the FBI was calling these parents, pissed off parents, asking for mask mandates to be lifted, among other issues, domestic terrorists.
Right. Yeah. God, man. Well,
Ultimately, it's a situation where you come in and you look around you and you wonder, this stuff isn't going away anytime soon, and you still have people resisting the fact that a libertarian needs to run these elections just to be a political party, you run candidates. I mean, it's just very simple. But when it come over the summer, things get more heated, things get more challenging. You have again, we're looking at the national red flag law. We're seeing all the charge cultural Marxism that's being expressed out there in regards to uh, people wanting to focus on these issues as opposed to real issues that matter to real people. And ultimately, they're stuck. Whether you're Ron DeSantis or Charlie Crist, you are kind of stuck in this. This is what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to change now, because I can't do anything about it. Because if I try to, I'm going to fail. So why would I want to be exposed like that? Rather he'll just try and play the hand he's got. And libertarians are going to play the hand they got, which is in the greatest time of upheaval in our post lockdowns. Uh, this is the first election. This is the first election post lockdowns we're actually confronting. So of course this idea of freedom should be addressed. And the campaign slogan for this campaign, for the Libertarian running for governor in Florida, is freedom without compromise.
oh, that's awesome. I love that. Man, I think it's I think it's so important that that libertarians continue to run in these big races and challenge the status quo, and give voters another option. You know, an option that's really going to stand up for their liberties and their freedom. And um, I do want to kind of wrap up here. I didn't mean to keep you for as long as I did, but I've been so fascinated with your answers and what you've been talking about, because it's so different than like the media coverage of DeSantis. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
there's so much stuff that I didn't know that you've been talking about. I've been taking notes and
Well,
everything, just blown away at how the contrast of the coverage of DeSantis's Florida, and then like what's actually been happening there on the ground. It's
I
kind
mean,
of blown me away.
it's so. I mean, I've met DeSantis a number of times in person. I've shaken his hand. I've taken photos with him. Those photos may or may not come out one day. But the reality comes down to is that one of the first times I met him was in person. He was a proponent of the fair tax in Congress, so he's one of the spokespersons for it. So and that requires abolishing the IRS, right? So
Mhm.
DeSantis went from, oh, I'm going to abolish the IRS to I won't even say anything about the FBI, raiding Trump's place and political prosecutions. I'll just remain silent. I won't even call for another agency to be abolished anymore. He just that hasn't his what he's done is, and he wasn't basically he wasn't much of a constitutionalist in Congress either, right? So it's
Mhm.
just he's played the game, and frankly, when you think about how he raised up the ranks and he came into his political career of his, having basically accepted the deployment to be the JAG officer who was in charge of basically the torture camp over in Guantanamo
Mhm.
for years. That's really where he's coming from. He basically he will make the pact with the devil if he needs to. I don't see anything else. I don't see anything that says otherwise. All points indicate to that. That's how kind of unscrupulous he is with his positions, with his political positions. So and now he's running against the chameleon Charlie Crist, who was the former governor. So now what's really there to lose for a libertarian to sit out there and contrast these issues? But more importantly, I mean, I do want to just quickly give a rundown on issues that matter that libertarians
Oh,
are
please,
providing solutions for. So for
please
instance,
do.
yeah. So we have a regressive property tax system in Florida. It's we're not capped like California with Prop 13, where they have a 1% increase cap on property. Instead, what we do is we have something called Save Our Homes, which has only for residential property like a 3% cap on the increase of property taxes. So guess what? That means that snowbirds, investment properties, commercial properties get their property taxes increased by a lot, and they get that cost increase gets just passed over to consumers, regular people regular people in Florida. So I espouse something either just straight up abolishing property taxes, or going to a 1%, at least a 1% cap, like they do straight across the board, like they do in California. Not this wonky, complicated property tax exemption system that exists. And frankly, nobody like school districts don't really get funded directly from property taxes. It all gets collected up in Tallahassee or state government by the legislature, and then they write a check to everybody. That's really how good things get funded. Those kind of services get funded in Florida.
Mhm.
On the other side of that, what else is the biggest issue? Property insurance. So property insurance is a huge deal in Florida because we literally have a law. We literally have a law that says if you're going to you mandates that all mortgages that have some kind of insurance attached to them must get windstorm insurance. Windstorm, like or like a hurricane insurance, or they call just basically has a category of property insurance.
Mhm.
Obviously, that adds an enormous cost now to home ownership. But the reality is that it's not fixed; it's variable. So inflation goes up, the price for replacement of homes goes up. All of a sudden, the insurance companies uh, cannot continue to hold on to that policy because it's not they only designate so much money toward it, and they start dropping people. This is the private sector. So what we have now is a monopoly on property insurance. That's a state monopoly that is also going bankrupt. So all of a sudden, so you're going to get dropped by either the public insurance or the private insurance and have to seek even higher and higher premiums to pay to afford to keep your house. In order to keep your house, in order to abide by the state law that says you are mandated to have this type of insurance. So the difference ends up being is if you're in a bad area, if you're in a coastal area, your home is anywhere like 25 miles from the coast, you're going to be paying an extra $8,000 to $10,000 a year in insurance, and just in
Damn.
insurance that gets attached to obviously gets broken down to monthly payments and added to your monthly payment to your mortgage. Because your mortgage will is the mortgage company that's going to abide by the law, even if you don't or if you don't want to. If you pay everything cash and you don't have a mortgage, and you just go without, and that's perfectly fine. But that's really the system that we have in place. Governor DeSantis called in June for, I'm sorry, in May. He called in May for a special session to fix the problem. Or that was going to happen a month later in June. We're now in September, and it still hasn't happened. Why? At this point, like I said, he can't even convince his legislatures to do it. He doesn't, and he frankly doesn't have the balls to go against his own people, and he'd rather let people basically lose their homes en masse. So
Mm.
because that's really what's going to happen. They're just going to have to stop paying bills. On the other side of that, one of the biggest cost of living issues, of course, is energy. Like everyone's seen at the gas pumps, right? But in
Oh yeah.
Florida, we have, like a lot of states, we have a massive monopoly on electricity generation. Whether it's at a local, we have a big utility, which is Florida Power and Light, or Duke Energy. Duke Energy is also in a couple other southern states, and then some other places have smaller, co-op, which a co-op power, power electricity generators, utilities that are sometimes owned by Wall Street companies actually. So in some places, like in Key West, you can go from paying less, about around $200 for a home for a monthly bill to $700 all of a sudden. I mean,
Oh my God.
that's crazy, but the average is somewhere around 300. The average is somewhere around 200 to 300%, somewhere in between there, not 400 or 500%, which is the acute problem. Now in Florida, we're number one for solar energy potential. We don't got solar though, because the utility keeps blocking it. We're
Mm.
number one for tidal potential, so you can put out buoys that generate electricity that just goes up and down on the waves to generate electricity. We don't got that at all. And of course nuclear, right? So ultimately, there's so much about Florida policy that's actually governed by the federal government, whether it's nuclear, whether it's our water, whether it's managing our waterways. We have the big ass Lake Okeechobee, uh, that is just this is run by the federal government, by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and we're not really allowed to clean it up. We're not allowed to manage the real cleanup efforts for that water body of water. It eventually gets contaminated by pollutants, upstream pollutants, usually like agricultural runoff. So there's nutrient rich that causes like these algae blooms over there. Uh,
Right.
and so just getting, you know, my alternative slogan for the campaign really is, make Florida free, right? Like this idea that we need to have an independent Florida, but in order to really seize our own destiny, seize it back, we have to do that by just taking over control of the control that the federal government has on regulations here in Florida. So I said nuclear, right? Because we shouldn't rely on there's clean energy technology now. We haven't The United States hasn't had a new nuclear power plant anywhere in the country for like 40 years. And the last
Right.
one application that came in is all that you see is like improvements or expansions of existing sites. So if we assume that our own regulatory body, we can approve our own. We don't need the feds for that. Same with the water, right? A Florida Constitution says that only the state of Florida, not the federal government, is in charge of water rights in the state. It's just simply natural that we would assume control over these and not even stop asking permission from the federal government on these matters. And then ultimately, so these are the big, ultimately for like the environmental cleanup, we need to stop like just tossing money at problems that only scratch the surface of like water-based pollution. We have basically what happens is they basically put chemicals in the water that apparently attaches to nutrient contaminants and lets it float to the bottom of water and just stay there forever, right? That's really what a lot of this is, or a mechanical process where they suck up water, and they basically have some kind of separation for algae and then spit the water back out. And that's none of it goes to the root of the cause, which is
Right.
resolving the nutrient pollution upstream or finding a way to prevent or capturing the nutrients. So I endorse this process through an organization called Hemp for Water, which basically uses hemp, industrial hemp application to fix nitrogen and other nutrients uh, through their patented process that is not invasive, and that is obviously promotes actual water health, and ultimately gives us a chance to actually solving the problem at its root causes. I mean, there's a lot of other issues that really are very central to the state of Florida. Things like defend the guard. I'm all on board. I'm a libertarian. We are the anti-war party of the United States,
Hmm.
and the federal government is using the National Guards in different states as a recruit backstop, because who wants to go to war forever, right? Wants to see their buddies and
Right.
themselves maimed, and then come home and uh, like one guy said on the internet, I lost both my legs so I can see these guys for the GI program, and then I see these guys getting uh, their tuition debt paid for, waived, right?
Right.
So the idea that it's even and you had one neocon in Congress tweeting out, why did they do this? They're getting rid of the number one recruitment idea that we have, right, for joining the military. And ultimately, this nonsense, the nonsense would be stopped if we passed the Defend the Guard Act, which is a law that basically prohibits the use of National Guardsmen to on foreign deployments without a constitution, a congressional declaration of war, like the Constitution says. At the
Right.
very least, it's not like the Constitution is a bad document, but obviously there's something wrong that after 200 that has not been able to restrict or rein in the continued growth of government and the continued undermining of individuals and state rights. So it's really, at the end of the day, it's only as good as the people who are going to represent it, right, and promote it and enforce it. So that's what we have to really get back to. I think we're getting to a level playing field between the big media companies. That's why I'm doing this podcast, because
Hmm.
ultimately, we the people are the check. We are the ultimate authority. We're the ones that grant the sovereign authority. We're the ones that give authority to states, to all these government agencies, because it originates from us, not from them. There's no divine right. There's no a deity that came from heaven and said this. We're giving authority to the United States Congress or to the Supreme Court or to the governor's mansion. No, or the mayor's or city hall. By no means. It's always been the people, and we're going to get there. And libertarians are ready to run for office everywhere and really promote issue alternatives to the to what's the current situations in society, whether it's education, energy, housing. I mean, uh, it's not it's not simply about contrasting and calling out the inconsistency of the Democrats and Republicans who are just joining
Hmm.
forces in agreement. It's really about providing solutions for people who have been for people's issues that have been ignored by both parties. So it's not like, oh, you're ignoring them. No, no, no. It's now, look, this is a simple way to do this, right? We don't have to we don't have to deal with being ignored. We don't have to put up with it anymore. So that's what we don't have to compromise in order to in order and beg for our freedoms. We have our freedoms. We don't have to compromise anything ever, and that's where
Oh,
we're at.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm, I'm real glad we did this podcast. I'm real glad that Florida has a real solid pro liberty candidate on the ballot for not just governor but also Senate. Like I said, really good libertarian ticket there, and there's some other really good libertarians all across the country. So I think, I mean, people are going to be fired up once they dig into the Libertarian Party's message and start seeing these candidates out and about. And I'm just I don't know. I'm really excited for a lot of you guys come November. I think it's going to be really interesting. Just before we wrap up here and go, do you have anything you want to shout out? Website, Twitter handle, upcoming events, just anything you want to promote?
Sure. I mean, right now I'm sharing the news that this past week, the campaign has welcomed Pastor Jerry Tubb Rorabaugh from Jacksonville. I'm really proud. He's the running mate, the lieutenant governor running mate for the campaign. He's a great communicator on these issues as well. I felt that his call to action, his call to people of faith to basically not rely on government to make people better is something that people need to hear. And I'm very happy that he's joined the campaign. We're going to be expanding on all these issues in a written format on the website in the next couple of days. I'm really excited to just be hitting the campaign trail. We will be posting some of the events that we'll be participating on. I know Pastor Tubbs going to the Panhandle in a week and next week, and we're obviously going to be doing different events for September 11th for the remembrance, the anniversary of September 11th, and we have and those are kind of things that are up and coming. If you want more information, you can check out the website, or you can go to social media. It's all the same. Roosforflorida.com, ROOSFOR Florida.com, or at the socials, same thing, Roos for Florida, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even TikTok, and soon to be YouTube.
There we go. Go check him out. If you're in Florida, be sure to look him up and consider him as you go to the polls in November. Hector, it's been awesome having you on the show, man. I've really appreciated it.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. Taylor here with the first episode of the Bonfire Briefing Podcast. Today I'm talking to UFC bantamweight prospect Julio Arce. He's 5-3 in the UFC and coming off an impressive win at UFC 273 over Daniel Santos. In addition to his most recent win, we talked about his journey to the UFC, last weekend's UFC 274 pay-per-view, and what his fight plans are for the remainder of the year. Hope you enjoy the conversation. All right, there we go. Julio Arce, welcome to the show.
What's going on, my man? How you been?
Man, I've been pretty good. How about yourself?
Dude, I'm still, watching my last fight, and just like reliving the moment, but just like nonstop observing.
Yeah, man, I definitely want to get into that because your win over Santos was incredible. I mean, if people are looking for, a super impressive display of boxing in the UFC, I mean, I think that fight is a great example of that. And not just your boxing either, too. Your kicks, man. You don't. You set them up and everything, but you don't really wind up to them. It's just, you throw that thing and it's right there at its target. It's super impressive. I know I retweeted that kick that you knocked out Erosa with.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of the smoothest head kicks I've ever seen.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
Do you attribute that to your training at your current gym?
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been training on the Tiger Showmans now for 21 years.
Damn.
Yeah, I've been there from the start to where I am now, and we started like we started with like a karate base, and then we adapted to the ever changing mixed martial arts, and like I was taught like a lot of look, we used to be like with the kind of the discipline of karate, but we started go into the world of MMA, and the Showmans, they did that. They didn't just like say, okay, this is the only way we're gonna do it, and this is the only way that works. No, they're like, nah, we're gonna add on to this. We're doing jujitsu in there. We're doing this, and dude, the amount of things I've learned, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. You've been at the same gym for 21 years. I do want to talk about your most recent win, but I'd love to hear about, how you got into MMA, what the journey to the UFC has been like, everything like that. If you could give me a little overview.
Of course. So, like when I was little, I kind of went through like the stages of life of being a skinny kid, and when I came to live in New York, you know, I kept thinking I was like, yeah, I can eat whatever I want, and I became a fat kid, an overweight fat kid, and of course, dealing with the ruthlessness of kids in school, and I couldn't really, and I was trying to find, like other activities that I would like fit in, but it's like I wanted something that I would hold myself accountable for, something that would be like mine, like that it's like my journey.
Right.
So my oldest sister Katz brought me into Tiger Schulman's, and from there on, I fell in love with it ever since, and I was just like, oh, this is what I love to do. And then next thing you know, like I was losing weight, I was doing jujitsu competitions, um, our own in-house tournaments where we all the Tiger Schulman's locations gather and have all their students, kickbox and do jujitsu, and then from there, when I finally, turned 18, I was able to start fighting, and here I am now.
Right. Is about 18. Is that when you started doing like the Golden Gloves, getting into that? Because I know you were the 2011 champion there. When did you start, getting into that kind of competing?
So when I turned 18, I finally was able to do. I actually started my career off in amateur MMA, which
Mm,
was pretty cool. And then my coaches were like, "All right, we gotta." It's like you done jujitsu tournaments, you're doing MMA where you're kind of displaying your jujitsu. We want to see you display more of your striking.
mhm,
Then they had me do kickboxing fights, amateur kickboxing fights. Then I think I racked up. I was 6-0 as an amateur in amateur MMA, and
mhm,
then I was 5-0 as an amateur kickboxing, and then I got my first loss in kickboxing, and they wanted me to trust my hands more, and
mm.
that's where like you're doing the Golden Gloves. So I'm like, all right, it's like I didn't want to do it at first. I was just like, I don't want to do boxing, and I, like a kid filled with excuses sometimes. Where you're just like, I don't, I like doing MMA. I like doing everything. I didn't want to do just boxing,
Right.
but it actually turned out to be the best experience I could ever have because I fought every week. And next thing you know, I went from fighting in like these little school gyms to fighting in Madison Square Garden, which was a huge, huge accomplishment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I bet that had to be crazy. What is it like fighting in Madison Square Garden compared to some of the other venues that you fought at before?
Dude, it's unreal. It's unreal because I mean, look, it's the mecca of boxing, and I got to
Right.
do that, and it was my first boxing experience. I'm going people who've been doing boxing since they were little, and I'm like doing practicing every discipline, but people who just specifically um, do just boxing, and I was getting in there and I was beating these boxers, and it felt great because it's like all the hard work is really coming into play. Like I had a mission. I wanted to go professional. So if winning the Golden Gloves was my way to becoming a pro, it's like then I was making sure I got that done.
Right. I can't remember who it was. I think it was an MMA fighter, UFC fighter who said something, I think maybe last week, about, like the crowd in Madison Square Garden is so loud that they couldn't even hear their coaches giving them advice.
Oh my God.
You know,
Like it is like that, but I think everybody's different. For me, the moment I fought at the Gardens, like, all right, you just gotta focus on just one voice. Focus on one voice. That's it. And that's what I did, even through the crowd, through the sound of the crowd.
okay, so you were able to kind of tune everything else out and just kind of focus on, the one person that you really needed to get through to you in that moment.
Absolutely.
So how did you go from fighting in a ring of combat to getting your way on Dana White's Contender Series?
So, the journey to the UFC was also, it was filled with a couple of like little upsets here and there because I started, once I became I turned professional, I was kind of climbing up, and then as I was I think 7-0, I got my first loss. I was on the radar to get picked up by the UFC, and I got offered a early fight, like even earlier in my career. I think I was 3-0 to fight. I forgot who he is in the bantamweight division. I don't think he's around any longer, but it was a fight in Canada, and my coach was like, it's like, no, it's like we don't want to put you under the bright lights too soon. You need to build. You need to have time. It's like you're just like, we're not going in there. And I think my coaches, because they watched out for me in that regard, because in my mind I'm like, yo, it's like this is my time.
Right.
But they're like, nah, you don't want to get in there under the bright lights where, you know, it's like you have to deal with the nerves, you have to deal with the crowd. It's like you're not ready for that. Even though you are, then like trust us. It's like just wait. And I was like, all right. It's like kept fighting, and then I got my first loss under Brian Kelleher,
Mhm.
and then when we were supposed to fight again, I got hurt, and he ended up fighting, and he was in I think it was Dana White's looking for a fight, and
Oh
that
yeah.
night he knocked somebody out with a spinning back fist, and he got picked up.
Mhm.
So in my mind, I'm like, damn, I lost that opportunity. That's twice. But I'm like, forget it, man. It's like, I'm gonna keep training, keep doing my thing. Um, we did the rematch, and look, he tapped me out. Well, actually, he got picked up after we fought the second time, and then then he got the spinning back fist knockout. Um, and then I'm like, oh, let me move to 45, and I moved to 45, got the titles there. And then there was another a contender series, looking for a fight.
Mhm.
And, that fight, I don't know why I put a lot of stress on myself, and I didn't fight the way I normally fought. And I was like, what the fuck, man? It's like, it was just one of these like fights that, I had a gritty opponent, but like, I think I just fought with like pressure on my shoulders. Like this is like a young fighter mentality. And then it's like the fight was just like boring. Like I won the fight, but it was one of those just like that somebody else got picked over me because I didn't fight the way I wanted to fight.
Right.
And so then I just kept fighting. I was like, all right, let's keep going. Let's defend this title. And then I got an opportunity at the Contender Series. And when I went there, I fought Peter Pettis, and I TKO'd him the second round. I hit him with like a barrage, like I hit him like a 30-piece combo. And so it's like when you're in a video game and you're just button smashing, just like pressing and just trying to get this done. But
Right.
I'm thinking like, yo, that was more than enough to earn my shot, and I still didn't get it. And it was at that point where you look at it and you're like, it was like a little bit of like I left my mark. I showed him that like what I can do. But
Hmm.
then again, it was like heartbreaking because like I'm like, damn, it's like I still didn't get in, and I still like it's like was like what was it going to take for me to finally be able to get a call from these guys, and after that, it was a little like saddening. I felt a little bit like shit. But then I'm like, you know what? Like in my mind, I'm like, it's like my time will come. It's like my journey is different than everybody else's, And I did a kickboxing fight in Glory and knocked the guy out. And
Hmm.
then I just kept training. And then next thing you know, it was like, it was the first time Stipe fought Francis Ngannou, and I got a short notice call to fight Dan Ige because I think it was Charles Arosa, not Charles Arosa. Is it Charles Arosa?
Yeah, yeah, it was
Yeah,
Charles
Charles
Rosa.
Arosa. He got hurt, and they need a replacement. So my teammates, management just started going on Twitter, and my teammate Shane was like, "Yo, this guy's ready. He's been ready for it." And then they gave me that fight, and next thing you know, I was fighting Ige in UFC 220, and then I beat him. And look, he's a top contender now. So, and now here we are, man.
Yeah, no, that is it's a really crazy uh, journey to the UFC, and I think the consistency in your mindset is awesome. Despite the different hurdles and challenges that you had, you knew that you would get your shot in the UFC one day if you kept training and fighting, and you might have hit a couple of roadblocks on the way there, but you did eventually get that shot. And when you finally got it, did you finally feel like, yes, this is my moment, I'm going to go out there and make the best of it, no matter what?
Absolutely. Like everything felt right, and I was like, I'm like, this is the moment I was waiting for. Like the other moments, maybe it was too soon, but this is the right moment.
Yeah, and Dan Ige, like you said, I mean, he's a top contender guy now. I mean, that's a hell of a guy to have to make your UFC debut against.
I
Uh,
know, right?
how was your training whenever you were preparing? It was short notice, right? How much notice did you have in fighting him?
It was 2 weeks, but I was relentless in the gym, So like I was there even when like I'm there even when I'm not getting ready for a fight. I want to stay in shape. I want to stay ready for anything.
Right,
So
stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
exactly.
Yeah. What so when you're when you have a full fight camp, you have a lot of time to get in all the training that you need to get prepared. And obviously there's a significant advantage in being able to go through a full fight camp versus having to fight Dan Ige on 2 weeks notice. I mean, how did you guys cram in all that you needed to do in that 2 weeks? I mean, that's such a short amount of time to have to fight somebody like that and to come out successful. I mean, to beat him.
Yeah, well, like we didn't really cram for it. Like even like when I fought in Glory, like I stayed in the gym. Like I stayed training as if there was a fight for me.
Right.
Even before we heard that Charles Rosa had gotten hurt and they needed looking for an opponent. My other teammates, they had their fights, so I was in there training with them, doing hard sparring rounds, everything that has to get done, like my conditioning, all that. It, like I didn't take the foot off the gas pedal. I was just like, yo, let's keep it going. Let's keep it going. So then by the time they gave me this short notice fight, I was already in the fight shape that I needed to be in.
Right. And for the first, I think your first 6 fights or so in the UFC, you were fighting at featherweight, but here recently you've dropped back down to bantamweight and have been fighting there, and you've held titles in both weight classes. I'm wondering, what differences do you notice in how you fight, how you train, how you prepare at 145 versus 135?
You know what? For when I decided to make my move to 45, when I was in the regional circuit, I made that jump because I didn't want to deal with like I didn't have a nutritionist like I have now to help me with my weight cut. Um, and it wasn't, and I can say it, like it wasn't as structured as I should have been with my weight cuts, which
Hmm.
made me do the move to 145. And then when I got into the UFC, like these guys are just so much bigger than me.
Right.
Like, like if you see me, like you can clearly see I'm a 35er, not a 45er. So like I'm in there with dudes who are walking around much heavier, dropping to 145. Now look, I held my own, but if I wanted like any type of championship trajectory, like it was at 35, not at 45.
Right. Yeah. And I think you can definitely see that throughout your fights in the UFC. I mean, in your return to bantamweight in the UFC, you TKO'd Andre Ewell, and your most recent win over Daniel Santos. Man, you looked super impressive. Like I said, I mean everything, dude. Your jab, using that to stifle a lot of his offense. Your body shots were nasty. In the second round, you really started picking him apart with those body shots, and he was coming at you with some serious power, but you were able to just kind of stick to the game plan, pick him apart with your boxing. I mean, it was just it was a super impressive victory, man. How did you feel after that fight?
Dude, I walked away from that fight and I'm just like, the fact that I used a jab around kicking a left hand most of the time. And I'm like, this is the way it has to be done. I'm like, I just felt I was in the zone. Like I felt I'm like, this was the way I normally fought. This is my fun way of fighting. And I'm like, it's like, and I should have been fighting like this it's like, there's just points in your training, even during like your fights where it's like, you're fighting, but you don't fight like your usual self. And I wasn't me. And I'm like, then I paid for it by losing like split decisions. And then in this fight, I felt like it just felt complete. Well, partially complete. I need to now start doing more takedowns and involve more wrestling in there. But like, I'm like, I wanted to see the look of frustration in his face when he had a hard time trying to just catch me, trying to land something, like desperation building in his eyes, and as I'm just like picking away at him. That's and like and that felt great to see.
Oh yeah, I bet it did because in that first round, like I said, I mean he was throwing some serious heat at you. I mean he was winding up on some of those big shots, and he caught you with a couple of things there early. I imagine it had to feel pretty good, surviving that first round, those first initial onslaughts, and
Yeah,
then
weather the storm with him. He's a tough one.
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, and I mean to give credit to him, I mean it was his debut. I mean he fought pretty well those first couple of rounds in his own right, but man, you really stuck to it and picked him apart. And I mean, you even wobbled him with another just fucking smooth head kick there at like the end of round one. And I knew watching that I was like, oh man, this guy, he's in for a long, long fight.
Yeah, I'm like, and look, in this fight, I know I was being kind of looked over, And I know, since he comes from Charles Oliveira's camp, they're like, yeah, this kid is a prospect. This kid's gonna be trouble. And I'm like, nah. He's like, gotta watch out for me. I'm the trouble.
Yeah, yeah, they hyped him up pretty good before the fight. I mean, they really painted him out to be this, this future prospect in the UFC. And maybe he will be, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like you came in there and you just put the stamp on that real quickly. You were like, absolutely not. This is my time. I'm the prospect.
Yeah. It's like I'm like, it's like I've been here. Like this was my eighth UFC fight. I'm like, I'm like, nah, it's not happening. Not here.
Yeah, well, what do you think is next for you after such an impressive win like that? Do you have any opponents in mind? What are you thinking?
I don't have any opponents in mind. Like I'm actually trying to hopefully fight again end of July, August, like around there.
Mhm.
And then probably so then it gives me time to like recover then after that fight and then hopefully get another one before the year ends. But I think my after my loss to Song Yadong, it set me back. And then I have to fight a person doing the UFC debut. So it's like I gotta build back up. But I think after that kind of performance in that fight, I think the next step would be just a fight that'll get me closer to the top 15.
Oh, right, right, definitely. I want to wrap up here soon, but before we do, I'd like to talk about UFC 274. Did you watch any of those fights at all? Did you watch the pay per view?
Oh yeah, like I watched those fights were insane. Um, it's like I it sucks that the Cowboy fight didn't happen because I love Cowboy Cerrone.
Oh yeah.
He's It sucks that he got like food poisoning, and so I was looking forward to that fight. And then the Michael Chandler fight that was
Holy
just
shit, dude. That front kick was crazy.
he just hit him with the Anderson Silva.
Dude, it
But
was
I feel bad
even
for Tony though, because I mean I know Tony. Tony said he wanted to go in there and have fun, but he just had a big chip on his shoulder with all the stuff he was saying, and like it sucks that that now he lost his fight and he lost it in that fashion.
right.
So like I just
Yeah.
hope he's okay though because after that Gagey fight where he took just like so much damage and now he gets knocked out like that, like I just hope he's okay.
Oh yeah, definitely. That was one of those fights where you kind of got to see the duality of being an MMA fan, because that front kick was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, it just was. I mean, it was a hell of a front kick. The way, the way that Tony fell to the mat afterwards, Michael Chandler flipping off the cage like 3, 4 times, however many times he did those flips. And then his call out.
He pushed the cut, man. I was like, yo, get out of my way. I'm gonna do another flip.
Yeah, he was like, "Wait a minute, brother. I've got to get in a couple more flips." And so it was really cool to see. And then Chandler on the mic after a win is next to none. I mean, he always cuts these awesome promos after he wins. But if you've been watching MMA a long time, like I have and like you have, you hate to see somebody like Tony Ferguson lose in that fashion because I mean he's a killer, and he looked good, in the first round. He looked pretty good, but man, to lose it, so quickly in the second round with a devastating knockout like that, his fourth loss in a row, like you said, I think we were all just when we were watching the Justin Gaethje fight, I think we were all just, begging for that fight to end.
Hmm.
Nobody wants to see him go through that kind of punishment. And it's kind of hard to reconcile these recent losses of his with, the fact that he was on, that super impressive win streak that he was on for what, like 6 7 years. He didn't lose a single fight in the UFC.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to even. It would have. It was an impossible to imagine at that time that he would rack up the losses that he had. I know a lot of people were hoping that he would get a step down, in competition. A little bit of a. There's not really any tune-up fights in the UFC, but losing 3 in a row and then fighting Michael Chandler is definitely not a step down in competition.
Not at all.
No, and then the main event, there was all the, the controversy about the weight surrounding it, and I feel like that kind of, became the narrative of the fight. But once that fight started, man, it was crazy from beginning to end. All 3 minutes of it, or however long that fight lasted, it was, back and forth, crazy. I mean,
Oh my god! And then, the thing is, like, I get Charles had that whole the whole weight thing with the scale and stuff, and that guy went in with a bigger reason to win. He was
right.
like, "I'm gonna show you guys why I'm the champion."
Right. Yeah. I think he said after the fight, he was like, the lightweight champ has a name and it's Charles Oliveira. So he's, he's obviously going to be in the next title fight, whoever it's against. And he definitely deserves it. I mean, he's really putting together a resume, man.
Yeah, I
I,
think. Do you think they'll put they'll make him fight? Will he fight Conor or Islam?
I, th- the MMA purist in me wants to see him fight Islam. I feel
Yeah,
like,
he's due for it.
yeah, I feel like it's his time. He deserves the shot. Habib tweeted it the other day, said that that's kind of the only fight that makes sense, and I kind of think it is. But
Yeah,
you can't really blame anyone for wanting to fight Conor McGregor, and
they want to get paid. That's their
yeah,
payday.
that big Conor McGregor payday, man. I won't ever fault anybody for wanting one of those. But I would really love to see him fight Islam. I mean, you've got two people there. I mean, both the grappling with both of them is just is wild. I mean, I think it would be one of the best grappling matchups that we've seen in a while, and it's hard to even think about who would come on top, in those exchanges.
Hmm. I just think like Oliveira just has so many more ways to win.
Yeah, I think so too. And everyone always talks about his grappling, like they should. Don't get it wrong, but like he knocked down Gaethje to set up that rear naked choke. It's not
Yeah,
like he, took him down and smothered him with his wrestling and then submitted him. I mean, he knocked him down. He's got hands too, man. Everyone talks about the submissions because they are dangerous, but he can put your lights out too.
yeah,
I mean, he had his fight, with Michael Chandler was pretty similar. And his fight with Poirier was similar too. He faced a little adversity early on. He got knocked down in the first round against all three of those guys, but he's able to just. It's like when he gets knocked down, he really wakes up. You know,
yeah,
it's something like that because he got rocked in all of those early fights, but he was still able to come around and knock out Chandler, submit Poirier and Gaethje, and every second of those fights was crazy. No, I don't think anyone's ever accused Charles Oliveira of putting on a boring fight.
yep. That dude's just been on it.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think about the lightweight situation? Do you want to see Oliveira fight Islam next?
I definitely want to see Oliveira fight Islam. I think like look, this this guy's like you see how he is on his back. You see how he is standing. Like he's he's the type of like person who's he's seen it all through his journey.
Right.
He's gone through his peaks and valleys, and he became the champion for a reason. And I think if you put him now for the new vacant title against Islam, I feel like he is the person that you're looking to give Makachev that kind of fight.
Right, because Oliveira would be, a pretty big step up in competition for Islam. Really see if he belongs in that, in that championship conversation. I
Yeah,
think I think a question a lot of people are asking too is if Oliveira beats Islam, do you rank him as a greater lightweight of all time than Habib?
absolutely. Like
Yeah,
he went in, like he's going in there. He's putting pretty much the mini Khabib away.
right. Yeah, and I think they've got some, their resumes are kind of similar. There's some different names in there, but they both beat Poirier, they both beat Gaethje. I think if Oliveira goes out there and beats Islam, especially if he does it, and he does it early, like he did with Gaethje. I mean, I think you've got to put him, at the top of that list or at least above Habib. I really do.
Yeah,
And then that's just considering his most recent wins. I mean, that guy's been fighting in the UFC forever. If you look at all of the fights that he's had in the UFC, I think you've got to give it to him.
yeah, it's freaking. He's he's. You know what? I feel like if Oliveira puts a stamp on like Islam like that, he's accomplished more than Khabib did.
Oh yeah, I completely agree. Well, listen, man, I've got to wrap it up here. I've got another thing going on at 5, man. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me about your journey to the UFC and some of the fights that have happened over the weekend. I really do appreciate it. And just before we close out, do you have anything that you want to promote? Any sponsors you want to shout out? Anything like that at all?
I'm just always, like Team Tiger Showman's. My coaches, the Showman's, my boxing coach Ray, my first original instructor, um, Brian Godoffer, who's literally been like a father in me through all this, and just everyone who follows my journey, and my whole family, all my supporters. So, love it. Thank you guys. Love them all.
Oh yeah, I really appreciate it, man. Thank you for
Hey,
coming
thank you
on the
for having
show.
me, brother.
Man, I'll have you back anytime. Just hit me up. That was my
Appreciate it.
conversation with UFC bantamweight
Thank you.
prospect Julio Arce.
You too.
I really enjoyed hearing about his journey to the UFC and the perseverance that required. I mean, hearing him talk about how depressed he was after all the different roadblocks in his career was pretty inspiring. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure to follow Bonfire Brief Pod on Twitter for future episodes, and be sure to follow Julio Arce too. His ascension to the top is something you won't want to miss. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time. All right, there we go. We're rolling. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. It's absolutely a great pleasure to be on. Thanks to you and everyone involved with your program for having libertarian candidates on in the past. I'm a big believer in the local and statewide campaigners that represent our party, so I'm really grateful to anyone who supports them.
Oh, absolutely, man. And I love talking to libertarian candidates like we were talking about before. And like I said, I mean, there's not much better than getting a presidential candidate on. So I'm just really glad you made the time to come on. Now, what does a presidential campaign look like in these early stages? Has it gotten real crazy yet, or are you able to just kind of relax and take it easy for the moment?
No, it's crazy from the get-go. It's a competitive situation inside the party for the next 18 months. Our party will choose a nominee in May of 2024. While I do expect that it will be me, there are others who might argue with me about that, right? Um,
Right.
there are others who will be hopeful of earning the party's nomination. I believe some of those folks to be really well qualified individuals. So I'm excited to participate in the process with them. But because it is competitive, folks are busy already. I'm relatively early compared to others, but others will be coming in over the next few months.
Yeah, and what does your day to day for the campaign look like this early in the process? I'm curious to know.
There's a couple of activities that take up most of my time, for example. One is just the blocking and tackling of making contact with folks like you, whether it's a podcast or a website, a blog, someone in print. It's managing the social media aspects of it, as you might expect. We have a Twitter following, a Facebook following, Instagram. We manage an email communication list. We have 3 different websites that are up. So there's a lot of, just like I say, nuts and bolts that have to be tended to. The other big activity that's going on in a heavy way last week, this week, and next week is team building.
Mm.
We have approximately 20 advisors on our team at this point, and we have besides myself, I am full-time in this project, as you might imagine. We have someone else who's a paid employee of the campaign, and we are onboarding 2 more people to work on the campaign over the next few days, or certainly over the next week or so. And then we're going to be onboarding a couple more people after that. So just the team building aspect of it alone is very, very important. It has to be managed just right. So that takes up a lot of my focus this week and next week.
Oh, I imagine it does, and I imagine it's pretty helpful to have. You said you 20-something advisors helping you out.
No, it's awful.
How?
Anyone who wants to do this in the future, my strong advice is to have no advisors whatsoever. I think limit it to your spouse and maybe your mother. 0 is the right number. I hope they're all listening. They're just terrible people. They are all headstrong. They're all libertarian. They all have their own opinion. And they're worse, and you'll appreciate this, worse, they're diversified. We've got men, we've got women, we've got old, we've got young. We've got people in the Mises Caucus. We have people who are not in the Mises Caucus. We have people recent to the libertarian movement. We have people who have been in the libertarian movement for decades. We have a past chairman of the party. We've got people who are heavy hitter donors and people who just stick their finger in the water. And all of them have figured out they're smarter than I am and have no problem telling me so on a weekly basis. It's just awful. I recommend getting rid of all advisors, but it's too late for me.
Oh man, that's funny. Well, how did you come in contact with all these terrible people? Are they people you've worked with in the past? Had recommended to you? What?
Oh yeah, absolutely a hodgepodge. I ran for Congress last year in a special election in Broward County, Florida, which is a weird experience because it's one of the bluest, most democratic districts in the United States,
Oh
and
yeah.
nobody pays any attention to any races down there unless you're a Democrat. So it's very hard even to get some media attention at all from the newspapers. So I met a lot of people that way. The Libertarian Party of Florida is quite strong, and the Libertarian Party of Broward County in particular is very strong. So I met a lot of people that way, a lot of people who appreciated the campaign and the hard work that we did, came out of the woodwork to help, to advise. And so I onboarded a lot of people that way. And then recently moved to Virginia. I moved from Florida to Virginia earlier this year. And met some people up here. So we have people on our team from Virginia and Delaware and New York and North Carolina, as well as the old Florida crew. So it's people from lots of different places. Really, the only thing that they have in common, they have 2 things in common. One is that they're libertarian,
Mhm.
And the other is they darn well know that they're smarter than I am, and so they're full of great advice. And the truth of the matter is that they make me a much better candidate. Um, but getting better is not always as much fun as they say in the brochure, right?
Right.
Uh, you know, I have grown a lot in my libertarianism over the past, say, 3 years. And we have a platform now that I believe in a great deal. And I have enjoyed sharing it already the past few months and look forward to sharing it over the next 18 months with everybody in the party.
God, 18 months. 18 months of campaigning. That is
18 months of campaigning inside the party.
yeah,
And
yeah.
then we have 6 months of campaigning to the rest of America.
Oh my goodness. Well,
So
I'm glad you're doing it and not me. I'll
it's
tell you
not for
that
the
right
faint
now.
of heart. No, I am not happy about that at all. I mean, I'm happy that part of it is me, but the part about it not being you, we are going to change in the future. You
I-
you are gonna run for office in the future. I know that you think I'm lying about that, but it is absolutely the truth. Someday you're going to run for office. I am going to help you, by the way, which is also weird. And you are going to hate every minute of it, and then you're going to love it, and you're going to realize what I tell everyone who gives it any consideration whatsoever. There is no higher calling in the libertarian movement, in the liberty movement,
Mhm.
than campaigning for office, sharing the message, getting the word out with absolutely no expectation of personal financial gain or even self-aggrandizement. You do it for the cause. You do it because it's the right thing to do. And I see this in your future.
We'll see. I don't know. I'm not as convinced as you are, but time will tell. Who
It'll give
knows?
us something to argue about in the future.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and obviously I don't have to tell you this, but like the race for 2024 is already heated up. I'm not surprised that you're already in the thick of things, and things are crazy. Which it's wild. We haven't even left 2022 yet, and 2024 is already just right here.
Yeah.
And you're running for president in a time too where I think even more so than 2016, voters are desperate for another option. They're looking at Biden on the left, and
Yeah.
they're looking at Trump on the right, maybe DeSantis on the right. Although
Yep.
I don't know about that. Maybe we'll see.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
how did we get to this point where those are the two best options that the two mainstream parties can come up with? I mean, how did
I,
we find ourselves in this situation, Mike? I'm trying to figure it out.
yeah. Well, yeah, I have figured it out. I have solved all the world's problems and I have written it down here. So
There we
it'll
go.
only take me a few moments to explain it, of course. Um, no, and I know you don't expect that from me either, but I have spent some time thinking about this. I do believe that today is the result of a long chain of events. Maybe when we first stepped off the curb was by centralizing so much power and authority in the federal government over the past couple of centuries. But I do think another inflection point was when the American public began getting its news from different sources, which ultimately I believe to be a very good thing. It has proven problematic over the past couple of decades in the sense that people on the left get their news from left-wing sources and people on the right get their news from right-wing sources, and people seem to have lost any sense of common purpose, common interests, and consequently any respect whatsoever for people on the other side of the aisle. And this has led each party to grow into these beasts that seem to, on a daily basis, disregard what had been their political agenda
Mhm.
and make their number one objective keeping the other side out of power.
Right.
And I believe that each party demonstrates almost on a daily basis a greater interest in keeping the other side out of power, not only a greater interest in pursuing what had been their agenda in years and decades past, but to be honest, a greater interest in keeping the other side out of power than adhering to the Constitution. And I
Right.
believe in a democracy, this is where authoritarianism grows up. In a democracy, it grows up out of the idea of politicians convincing people we need more power. We politicians, we government officials need more power, and you should give it to us, because what you have to fear is the other guy coming to power. What you have to fear is that other party taking over, and you should fear that more than you should fear the loss of adherence to the Constitution, more than you should fear the loss of your civil liberties. This is where authoritarianism comes from, and I think this is probably a more long-winded answer than you were looking for. But I do believe that a big reason we're in this weird situation we're in, where people are disappointed with the parties that had represented them in the past, the leaders of these particular parties are especially disappointing. These are situations that come up when too much authority is vested in any particular party. It's too much vested in the federal government itself, too much authoritarianism, too much willingness to compromise the law, compromise ethics, compromise the Constitution in order to keep other people out of power. And it's what leads to these weird situations. So I think it's a huge opportunity for the Libertarian Party. You're right. People have changed their outlook on certain things. I also think it's an obligation for the Libertarian Party to play a role in the future.
Yeah, I know. I think you're absolutely right. And, I'm glad that, we have a liberty-minded candidate like yourself that's willing to jump into that arena and fight the battle that I desperately do not want to fight.
But you will be joining in the future. I'm
Well,
sorry if I'm the first one to tell you that, but you will be campaigning in the future.
we'll see. I don't know. we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about your background, because I feel like we could probably do a podcast just on your career alone. I mean,
And that would probably be the worst podcast ever produced in America.
yeah, but I would love it. It would.
You and I might enjoy it. We could do one podcast on me, one podcast on you, and then we'll do a podcast for the rest of the world that they would actually listen to. How's that?
Hey, I'm game. Don't tempt me with a good time. But police officer for a little over a decade, PhD in economics. You were at the Office of Management and Budget, along with a million other places. All your finance experience. I mean, I could go on, and I just met you. I mean, could you walk me through your professional background just a bit? Tell me a
I'll
little
give
bit
you
about that.
the 2-minute version. Yeah, it's not a coincidence that I have gray hair, even from the standpoint of the passage of time or the passage of one crisis after another. I was in the banking industry for a little while. Came out of engineering school and then business school. Worked in the banking industry for a little while. Went back to graduate school in Washington, D.C. because I wanted to pursue a career. I was interested in public policy.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right. Earned a master's degree and a PhD in economics at the George Washington University, which is what we would call a rational expectations school, a descendant of the Chicago School of Thought, itself a descendant of the Austrian School of Thought, a free market outlook type of university. Really a wonderful experience. Yeah, I worked for the White House for a couple of years, other government agencies. I worked for the 1992 Bush reelection campaign as a Republican. That's the campaign that Bill Clinton won. So that was a tough experience. I was around the White House and that campaign when President Bush, I'm talking about Herbert Walker Bush, right? The elder President Bush. I was around when he had gone back on his promise. You might remember his famous promise that went something like this. People will ask me to to tolerate new taxes. And I'll say, read my lips, no new taxes.
Right.
And then eventually he went back on that pledge. And I got to tell you, for a young conservative economist, that was a tough day, right? Those were tough years.
Oh yeah.
That'll teach you to grow out of being a Republican real fast.
What
So
what did you do on that campaign exactly for HW?
I was a
What was your role?
communications staffer. I had been a low-level economist working for the Office of Management and Budget for the White House for a couple of years. And then I became a low-level communications analyst on the campaign, which is a conglomerate of a weird set of assignments. For a couple of months, I remember my job was to read every word out of Bill Clinton's mouth and look for subtle changes and report them to my bosses. That was a funny assignment. I helped prepare material, questions and answers for the president when he was getting ready for debates. I would research, what it is that people are likely to ask in a debate, what kinds of questions they like to ask, and, what answers have been traditionally given. Nuts and bolts, stuff like that. I managed a team of analysts whose jobs were to keep track of issues surrounding the campaign. This is before the internet days, right?
Right.
So, as you might imagine, it was fairly labor intensive to keep track of things. We had literal files, not electronic files
Yeah, couldn't
online.
just do a Google search, huh?
Yeah, we couldn't just do a Google search. We kept files of newspaper clippings and facts and charts, and someone would call down to our basement-esque office and say, what can you tell me about XYZ issue? And we would have to put together a pile of papers and run it up to whoever was asking. So it was that sort of thing. A lot of work that thankfully doesn't have to be done the same way these days. And
Oh
after
God.
that, I went back into the banking industry. I was an advocate for free markets on behalf of the banking industry for quite some time. A partner of mine and I, after that, had our own business educating bankers in a lot of operational aspects, not really political aspects, but
Mm-hmm.
as running your own business is its own education, and did that for a bunch of years as well. Taught economics at the graduate school and undergraduate level at a couple of universities in Florida. Worked as a substitute teacher in the Broward County Public School high schools part-time at the same time for a couple of years, just to see what that was like. And we can talk about that as well. That was an eye-opening experience.
Yeah, what was that like?
Everything bad you've ever heard about Florida public schools is true. If
it's not hard to believe.
yeah, and it's funny. It's full of well-meaning, hardworking, intelligent, and talented people.
Right.
And that's one of the real shame of the whole situation, is that teachers are, God bless them. They mean well. For the most part, they work hard. They want to do a good job. It's just a very difficult environment, both from the standpoint of dealing with the kids, as well as from the standpoint of how schools are structured. A big problem with the industry is that there is no competition. There's almost no competition. The vast majority of students have to go to the school that they have to go to. If they have any flexibility at all, it's to go to another public school. Most kids don't have the option of going to a private school. And if they do have the option of going to a private school, their family has to pay the whole thing. And because of that price pressure, that cost pressure on the family, private schools are always trying to squeeze their budgets down as low as possible. And so most private schools have to deal with budgets that are much, much smaller than public school budgets. And so the competition, to the extent to which it exists at all, is not anything close to what you would call a level playing field.
Right.
And if there was any doubt in my mind about the need for school choice reform before getting involved with Broward County Public Schools, that doubt was absolutely erased during those experiences.
Oh yeah.
The other way I was involved with schools and youngsters came a couple years later when I became a police officer. I'd always wanted to be a cop. Indeed, when I was in grad school 20 years earlier in Washington, D.C., I had taken the entrance exam for the Metropolitan Washington, D.C. Police Department, and just at the last minute decided I just couldn't afford it. I wanted to raise a family and pursue a career, and they just weren't paying enough.
Right.
I'm not sure that's motivation of which I should be proud. I should probably be a little bit embarrassed by that, but whatever. That is the truth of the matter. And so I just put it off.
But that was something that, even way back then you had in your mind that,
Yeah.
you wanted to do that. Cause I feel like going from, like economist to, working for the former president, being an economist, being a teacher, I feel like jumping over to law enforcement. That struck me as interesting when I was reading over your website and your bio. I feel like it's a pretty interesting career path there.
It was a big change. Change is hard. In general, change is hard.
Yes.
Which is one of the reasons why change is good and change is so important. It's because it is hard and it forces you to do things differently and forces you to grow. Having said that, this particular change was large, and I turned 49 in the police academy.
Oh, wow.
We figured out that more than 50% of my class had at least one parent younger than I was. And a weird stat, huh?
Yeah.
In some respects, being a 49-year-old recruit is hard. Thank God I was in good physical condition, but it is a cultural change, right?
Oh, yeah.
On the other hand, being a 50 to 60-year-old, I did it for 11 and a half years. I did it from the ages of 49 to 60. Being an older guy really helps being the kind of cop you want to be.
Right.
The police culture will take over your brain. There are aspects about that are good and aspects about that are bad. And you have to really be well grounded on your own 2 feet to be the kind of cop you want to be rather than just going with the flow, right?
Right.
Like I say, sometimes going with the flow is not bad, but there are other instances in which I think I wish more cops were ready to stand on their own 2 feet and resist some of the temptations that are out there. The training that you go through as a police officer is such that it teaches you to be careful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not a bad thing. But there are aspects of that I think go too far in some weird directions. The culture teaches you that there is nothing more important than you going home at night, metaphorically speaking. There's nothing
Right.
more important than protecting your own safety. And I would argue, not just certainly as a libertarian, but I would argue as just a citizen, someone who's got, 30-year-old children.
Mm-hmm.
That can't be the most important thing, right?
Right.
The most important thing has got to be the safety of the people in your community. The good news about the police culture is that you do fall in love with your community. You do. Whether you anticipated that, expected that, or wanted that, in some sense you do. You take real pride in your ability to add value in your community, to try to keep people safe. You do get pissed when people commit crimes in your zone, especially if it's, on someone that or just, someone who is an innocent victim. That kind of thing really does affect you, and that's probably a good thing. Obviously, you don't want it to affect you too much because it can be a roller coaster.
Right.
So there are aspects of the police culture that are really important. I'm a big believer in public service, which is how I ended up in that situation in the first place. It's, of course, how I ended up working in public policy for the previous 20 years as well. So I'm not trying to run down police culture,
Right.
but you have to be on your own 2 feet so that you don't get sucked up into the things that we do as cops that can be, that can be lazy. You fall back on the idea that I'm important, that I know the difference between right and wrong, that I know when it's okay to violate someone's civil rights and when it's not. I understand the Constitution more than someone else does, and that gives me the right to bend it in certain places. These are the things that naturally crop up. I do not believe what some people assert, which is, cops are bad people and we tend to recruit the wrong kind of people and, stuff like that. I find that to be, frankly, bullshit.
Right.
The vast majority of cops, I say vast majority, I mean damn near every single one of the million beat cops in America does a great job, does the best job that he or she can.
Oh yeah.
But the training is such. I believe that as cops, our effectiveness is actually compromised in many ways by the training and the culture in which we're indoctrinated. And of course, the big thing that I spent a lot of time talking about with regard to police reform is not so much the culture, which is uber important, but the structure of how we manage police.
Mm.
I believe that we need to sunset this federal doctrine of qualified immunity and replace it with an environment in which police are held more accountable, and require police officers to carry third-party liability insurance like a doctor does, for example.
Right.
When a doctor makes a mistake, we don't say, well, he didn't mean to cut off the wrong finger. Suck it up, buttercup. Right.
Yeah.
And
Thank God we don't do that with.
thank God we don't do that. And right. There has to be not only some accountability, but look, the idea that you wouldn't have an opportunity to pursue redress in this country, I find un-American.
Right.
Almost every single case in which a cop does something wrong, it's a mistake. We're not talking about, criminal behavior. Obviously, if there's something criminal, there's no protection now, and there shouldn't be. We need to prosecute crimes committed by police officers just as earnestly as crimes committed by anybody, or arguably more earnestly, right? Because there's a violation of faith there.
Right.
But in too many cases, the deference given to police officers, not merely in cases where qualified immunity applies, but in cases more generally beyond qualified immunity, there's an air of deference accorded police officers that goes overboard. And I appreciate the fact that police officers are probably always going to receive some deference in a court environment. I get that. Some of that's going to be a little bit natural.
Mm-hmm.
But it's overboard. It's way too much. So I think that we need an environment in which police officers are carrying liability insurance. That way, when honest mistakes, screw-ups are made, there can be compensation there. And police officers that are, in the habit of being screw-ups are going to get priced out of the market by their insurance premium.
Right.
And this is so important because right now unions protect police officers too much from the accountability that I believe the industry needs. And while a union might be in the business of protecting a police officer, and, as a libertarian, I'm a big believer that everyone has First Amendment right to free association. I'm not trying to run down unions. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is they do too good a job, and the politicians do a crappy job of negotiating with them. So if you had some third-party referee, if you had private sector liability insurance, if there's a liability insurance carrier out there who is standing behind the police officers, they're not going to put up with the crap from the unions that says, you can't get certain information.
Right.
The answer is going to be, look, if you people want insurance, we're going to need all the information there is in the world. Everything from training records to academy records, past performance, past case issues, all kinds of things. And by the way, we're going to want to interview every one of these cops. So, there's going to be an ability to hold people accountable and an ability to understand in a greater fullness each individual case if there's someone involved that can pierce the veil that is put in front of the public by the police unions. So I'm a big believer in moving in that direction. The first step is to get rid of qualified immunity.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did when did you first think about running for public office? Because you mentioned it earlier. You ran in that the special election for Congress there
Yeah.
In Florida. Is that something that was always kind of like being a police officer, that was always
No.
kind of in the back of your head, or was that no?
No. A year and a half ago, our congressman in the area, Alcee Hastings, a longtime beloved Democrat, he himself had problems with past court issues that we don't need to go into.
Mm-hmm.
He passed away in office, and all of a sudden there was this special election. And in the Libertarian Party of Broward County, we thought this would be an opportunity to get our word out, our message distributed, if we participated in this election. And and so I jumped in. We had a team of volunteers, passed out a lot of brochures, shook a lot of hands in the Walmart parking lots, right? A lot of door-to-door activity, just
Oh yeah,
retail blocking and tackling, getting to know the Palm Beach Post and the Sun Sentinel in Dade County. A great experience, not for the faint of heart. If you have thin skin, this is not an appropriate pastime. I can tell you that much. People in Broward and Palm Beach counties had never even heard of libertarianism, had never heard of the Libertarian Party, and didn't have much interest. So it was a lot of hard work to get our message out. A rewarding experience, but not for those of thin skin.
Oh, I can imagine it's not.
Yeah.
What?
So that wrapped up in January of this year. That was actually a long campaign from April to January because Governor DeSantis put off the election so long. And it gave us a chance to realize that the brand of the Libertarian Party has almost no value in it whatsoever. You could probably get as many votes in many local races running as an independent as you would as a libertarian.
Right. Yeah, no, I could definitely see that.
Yeah, I believe that in part, that's a failure of our past national campaigns. One of the things that a presidential campaign has to do is build the brand value of the party so that when statewide and local candidates run thereafter, they're running in an environment in which someone has come before you to introduce the ideas of liberty to your constituents. When I was running for Congress in South Florida, I was teaching people how to spell libertarian, right? I mean, you really had to start from ground zero.
Oh man.
And so part of the reason I jumped into this campaign is because I want to lead the party's nomination process in a direction that says what really matters is getting our message out in a very credible way, and at the same time, a very bold way that differentiates us hard from the other parties in a way that people will remember. We can't be out there defining ourselves in terms of the other parties. We have to draw real clear distinctions so that people remember us, so that they know what libertarianism means. They know what the Libertarian Party stands for at the very least. And in this way, build the ID and the value of the party brand, so that those who come after us will be able to be more productive.
Yeah. And do you think the Libertarian Party now is doing a better job of doing that than they were in the past? I haven't been involved with like the Libertarian Party for very long, so I'm unfamiliar with how the party was being led like
Yeah,
prior to 2020 or so. And of course they just had the big leadership election
yeah.
not that long ago. You think the National Party's doing a better job now, or?
I think that I believe that the heart of the leadership of the Libertarian Party is in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that the leadership of the Libertarian Party understands the conversation you and I are having. They understand the need to brand ourselves in a very differentiated way. They understand how important that is. They understand the importance of local elections and statewide elections. And I'm hoping that they understand the role of the national campaign in that process.
Right.
Over the next 18 months, I'm going to be making that case. So anyone who hasn't heard that and is not on board with that idea, they will be over the next 18 months, I can guarantee.
Oh yeah. You're
Yeah.
definitely going to let them know.
And that's what I believe is really important about a national campaign is branding the party, branding our ideas, keep giving people an opportunity to understand what our ideas are and vote for something rather than just voting against the other parties. I mean, it's okay if you vote libertarian just because you want to send a protest signal. That's okay, right? But what we really want is for people to know for whom they're voting, why it's important, because that's where brand value comes from. So to do that, you've got to run a very professional campaign. You have to focus on policy. You can't just focus on why the Republican Party stinks and why the Democratic Party stinks. As easy
Right.
as that might be, you have to focus on more than that. And you have to have a credible candidate. Someone, doesn't necessarily have to be me, but I do believe it has to be someone who has dedicated a career to public service, who's been
Right.
involved in public service, who believes in it. I don't think it's the right approach to say all government sucks, all government employees suck, public policy in the United States sucks, and I want to be president. That is a tough sell for people.
Right.
Notwithstanding how much of that is true, there is
Very true.
some truth to all of that.
Yeah.
But I think the better sell is that we can do better. That there are people involved who want to do the right thing, who don't know what the right thing is. That the philosophies pursued by the parties have come so far from the Constitution as to be counterproductive and not even in the American public's interest.
Right.
By replacing some of those ideologies, we can make the world a better place and make the lives of American constituents better.
Yeah. And, much, much like your extensive, professional experience, I feel like, how much the two mainstream parties we have suck. I feel like we could also do an entire podcast just trashing them if we wanted to. Again, not something I'm opposed to, but just, I do want to talk about some of these ideas you're talking about, some of these policies
Sure.
that you're putting forward in your campaign. And I think anyone who follows you on Twitter like I do and would highly recommend, or goes to your website is going to notice that you talk a lot about the Gold New Deal.
Yeah.
And I want to get to that, of course, but I think we maybe need to establish a little context.
Yep.
There's an essay on your website that I'd recommend everyone read, titled "An Open Relationship is a Better Option Than a National Divorce." And the idea of a national divorce, like you mentioned in that article, has been the subject of debate in libertarian circles pretty prominently for the past few months or so.
Sure.
Some people are for it, some people are against it, but I feel like voters who are outside of that libertarian circle might not even understand what's being talked about.
Yeah.
So could you maybe explain what a
Sure.
national divorce is? What exactly would that entail?
Yeah, well, different people might mean different things by it, but the kernel on which I think a lot of people agree is that many people are interested in one form of secession or another, states having the right and the interest in divorcing themselves from other states, divorcing themselves from the federal government,
Mm-hmm.
and pursuing their own political futures.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this comes from a frustration with our federal government. It comes having too much power. It comes from a frustration of not appreciating how other Americans feel about certain things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Democrats don't want to be in the same country as Republicans and vice versa.
Right.
However, having said that, I don't believe that secession solves these problems. For example, if I don't remember the example I cited in that essay, but I grew up in Illinois, so it's an example that comes to my mind readily. Anyone who spent a lot of time in Illinois knows that that's already two different states. You know, Chicago and downstate Illinois are as different as New York City and Albany, New York.
Oh yeah, two completely different places.
They're just two completely different places. So, just to pick the Illinois example, if Illinois were to secede from the rest of the union, it's not going to solve the problem of Republicans and Democrats being mad at each other.
No.
So I don't think that secession solves all these problems. The Libertarian Party of Florida last year voted, or I should say earlier this year, voted for secession. And I do not mean that they voted with the idea in mind of making the statement, Florida has the right to secede. They were voting because they thought it was a good idea.
Right.
They were voting that they wish Florida would secede.
Yeah. Texas Republicans did something similar. They put it in their platform that
Yeah.
they're going to hold a referendum on whether Texas should
Yep.
leave the union, I believe, next year. So
It's a big deal. I believe that not only does it not solve some of our problems, I believe that it's also a political non-starter in the sense that the vast majority of Americans don't want to live in a different country than the United States,
right.
which is, at the end of the day, what we're talking about. Your state wouldn't be part of the United States anymore. Most Americans don't want that. And when I say most, I mean almost all of them
Yeah,
don't want
the
that.
vast majority.
Exactly. When people say secession is not a bad idea, they mean you leaving is not a bad idea. They don't mean we leaving, right?
Right.
So the other part that should be said is that I am not convinced that there is just zero value left in the federal government.
Right.
On balance, it may be a big red negative, but that doesn't mean that there's no value there to be had. I think the vast majority of Americans, for example, would say national defense is something that is more efficient with the states hanging together. Now, having said that, there may be very little beyond national defense that gives anyone a reason to continue participating with the federal government.
Right.
And so my idea is, and by the way, the fundamental idea behind the Gold New Deal is that we need a very different relationship between us and our government, which is why we're calling it the Gold New Deal. The New Deal in the 1930s being a real fundamental change in the relationship between individuals and the federal government, as well as between states and the federal government.
Right.
So we're kind of poking it in the eye of the New Dealers from 1930s to say the Gold New Deal. We're also making fun of the Green New Deal, which is an equally aspirational phenomenon. It's just more moronic than even the original New Deal.
Oh, yeah.
So we're trying to make fun of both of those a little bit. But
I like
having
it.
said,
I'm a fan. I think you're doing a good job with it.
Bless your heart. So we're suggesting we need a very different relationship with the government. And so my idea is, and Gold New Deal is a 10 point platform, so don't let me make it sound like everything is completely simplistic, but the fundamental, the big flagship idea is to give states the right to opt out of federal supremacy so that the world will look a lot more like the founders had intended when they wrote the 10th Amendment. Alternatively, we could just pass the 10th Amendment over again and say, now we really mean it. But I don't think people would go for that. So what I'm
Right.
suggesting is give states an option. It would require a constitutional amendment that would give states an option to say, we're going to opt out of federal supremacy going forward. So from now on, when there's federal law, even court cases, executive orders that conflict with state law, we can resolve that unilaterally in our own courts. We can pass state law that says that, we're taking a pass on that.
Right.
And to the extent to which there's conflicts already, we can unilaterally nullify federal law, federal court orders, federal executive orders. So it gives states the right to chart their own political futures, except for those very specific powers that the federal Constitution grants to the federal government, namely and mainly national defense.
Right.
And so you would remain in the Union. Anyone taking us up on this option that we are suggesting be offered, you would remain in the Union, but your relationship would be very, very different. You'd be able to resolve the vast majority of your political conflicts in your own state houses, where people are much more equipped to resolve these conflicts than they are at the federal level, where so much rides on the idea of keeping the other side out of power. Some of those problems exist in state houses as well, but state houses work much more effectively than the U.S. Congress does. So that's the flagship idea. And then underneath that, the rest of the Gold New Deal spells out some of the ways in which that relationship would be different. So, for example, to the extent to which the federal government needed to raise money, you would have to go through the state to do it. You wouldn't have a direct relationship with individuals. So we'd get the IRS out of the lives of individuals, and the state house would fund the federal government. The reason I think this is so important, I don't know if you or any of your listeners have ever been audited by the IRS. It's a very pleasant experience, as you might imagine. I've been audited.
Oh, I bet.
And yeah, they're very nice about it. They send you a nice letter. It's very clear about what it is that they're concerned about. And you have very cordial and clearly explanatory phone conversations after that. And it gets resolved in a matter of days. And of course, everything I just said is absolute bullshit. It takes a tremendous amount of time. They try to intimidate you they are horrible communicators. And part of what you need to do is wait them out, because they are typically wrong and not very smart. It's a horrible process. The big problem is that you don't have any power in that relationship.
Right.
The IRS is a ridiculously powerful law enforcement agency with broad powers. They have their own court system in which they are granted enormous deference, and you do not want to be in that situation. On the other hand, states have a very different relationship with the federal government and would be in a much better place to negotiate on behalf of their constituents. And that's the relationship that you want. The federal government wants a direct relationship with individuals because they can intimidate you into paying.
Oh yeah.
It's a horrible, horrible situation in my view. So the perfect situation, ultimately, what we want to get to is for a state to have the option of saying, we will fund you. You will send us a bill. Talking to the federal government, you will send us a bill once a year for our share of national defense, and that's it. And, the rest of your interests, none of our business. You can go pound sand. We're not funding the rest of it. That's the ultimate goal. That's the relationship that we want to get to, and is much more like what the founding fathers intended than this monstrosity that has been developed over the past couple of 100 years.
Oh yeah. And, accomplishing something like that is going to be a hell of a task. I mean, we were talking about just, how crazy your presidential campaign is going to be, but like having to pass a constitutional amendment to get, the Gold New Deal in effect. I mean, that's a whole that's a whole separate battle you're going to have to fight there.
It's a whole separate battle. It's a big deal. We'll see how the next couple of years go, and then we'll see how the next couple of years go after that, right? I
Right.
do believe that in the next 2, 6, 10 years, 14, I would say in the next 10, 14, certainly in the next 18 years, we will elect a president who is either a capital L libertarian or at the very least a lowercase l libertarian. I
Oh
believe
wow.
that will happen. I do not, that does not mean I'm very optimistic about the way this is going to play out. I believe that the reason we have such an opportunity, and indeed such an obligation, to participate in this process is because things are going so badly and likely to get much worse before they get better. And as things get worse, it'll develop certain opportunities for us that don't yet exist. And that's why I believe that will happen. But I'm not trying to paint a rosy and very optimistic picture. I'm saying that things are going to get so bad that eventually we will have a libertarian resurgence that is starting now.
Yeah, one thing that I've learned from talking to as many libertarian candidates as I have is that they are not optimists. They they often do paint a pretty depressing picture of what's to come, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's rough. I mean, we can be optimistic about eventually playing an important role. And of course, you have to be a bit of an optimist to be running, to be engaged, to believe that you can make a difference, even to believe that you can get your message out, to believe that people are listening,
right.
to know that your ideas are what can actually make America a better place. All of that requires some optimism, but you have to appreciate the fact that a lot of our opportunity grows out of the fact that certainly at the federal level, and I would argue at lower levels as well, the way government works in this country is not the way it was intended, and no longer largely in the public interest.
Right. Have you I know it's early in the campaign and everything like that, but have you had the opportunity to talk to like voters about the Gold New Deal? Or I'm real curious to see what the response has been like from people that you've talked to,
Yeah.
about what you're proposing.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have, gone out of our way to reach some people who are outside of the Libertarian Party, and I can tell you that there is a lot of explanatory work to be done in this arena.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that It's very likely the only way we can succeed in this is through political campaigning. I do not believe that this can be accomplished outside of running for offices,
Mm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it does.
You have to get people's attention. It's very it's hard. I mean, there are ways to make it easier than otherwise. There are techniques that are worth pursuing, both in terms of marketing and advertising and campaigning. But I am convinced that the only way to succeed in getting our ideas any traction is through political campaigns. That has to start with, as I mentioned before, a real fully differentiated presidential campaign. And it's real important. Speaking of receptivity, one of the things that we've also found, and we've conducted a little bit of our own polling on this already, not inside the Libertarian Party, but outside the Libertarian Party.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that people, Americans, voters, when they look at the presidential campaigns, they still believe that while it's in part a battle of ideologies, they still believe that the individuals involved matter.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to put forth a professional campaign, uh, a well-specified ideology that differentiates you, but you also have to have a candidate that people can look at and say they could at least imagine you being a credible threat to go all the way. You know, people have an expectation of what that looks like a little bit. Someone who's committed to public service, someone who's been around the block a little bit. These things matter. And if you don't check some of those boxes, your philosophy can be the greatest thing since sliced bread. People aren't giving you the time of day.
Right.
So we need to be able to make that case as well. All of this, Matt, each of these is a piece of the puzzle that has to be in place.
Oh, yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I think you're really right that the only way to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish is campaigning. You know, I mean, there might be other ways to maybe plant a seed or, you know, something, maybe get people's attention for a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, running a campaign like you're doing, you know, knocking doors, making phone calls, shaking hands, kissing babies, that kind of stuff. I mean, that really is the only way to educate people on this and win them over. I think you're absolutely right. It's crucial.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing but hard work and hopefully the intersection of opportunity and obligation.
Yeah, and you know, just we're approaching an hour here, and I don't want to keep you too long over that, but I did want to give you an opportunity here, just towards the end, to maybe talk about some of the other issues that you're prioritizing in your campaign. I mean, you know, we've covered the Gold New Deal. You know, we talked about police reform and ending qualified immunity earlier. There any other issues that you're considering? You know, real big key components of your
I
campaign.
think, yeah, thanks for asking. I think underneath the Gold New Deal, we also have a couple of planks on the management of fiscal policy and monetary policy in the United States, because I think people are focused on those as they always are, but even this time to a greater extent and a greater degree than ever. We're facing the possibility of a recession next year. I would argue a probability.
Right.
Uh, we'll see. And I think a growing proportion of the American electorate is recognizing that a lot of our economic problems come from bad public policy.
Mm,
The situation we're in now is not so different than the late 70s and early 80s, but in those days, people had a great deal more blind faith in the institutions of our republic, of our
right.
government. And we can argue round and square whether that was a good idea, right? I would argue that some of our blind faith was misplaced.
Oh yeah.
I don't think the American electorate has changed so much as we have had our eyes opened to some of the reasons why some of these institutions are probably not as worthy of our faith as we had once believed and hoped. So having said that, I think people are more ready than ever to hear the role that the Federal Reserve plays in trying to do a good job when it comes to controlling monetary policy, but cannot live up to the expectations that are put on the shoulders of the people that run the Fed. It just cannot be accomplished as it's structured. I believe that we need to replace Fed monetary policy with a rules-based monetary policy.
Mm.
I believe that we need to replace the Fed's regulatory authority with a more optional system, and that we need to take away the Fed's balance sheet and put it on the Treasury Department where it can be controlled through legislation. So it's not so easy for the Fed to bail out banks or bail out anybody else in the middle of the night willy-nilly.
Right.
In other words, those being the three parts of the Federal Reserve System, I would end the Fed lock, stock, and barrel. But that's a bit of a tough sell and has to be handled in parts. But I do believe that the American electorate is much more open to hearing this discussion than ever before. I believe the same thing can be said for fiscal policy. I think people are in greater recognition than ever before that bad fiscal policy hurts. I think people have been able to see the Biden administration sending out checks in an effort to get us through COVID, a policy that turned out to be a waste of money,
Right.
inflationary, that did not help things like supply chains, that added to our debt burden as well as inflation, that was not fair, and that spending money per se is just, as much as it's always been a bad idea, I think more people recognize that to be the case than ever before. I think that the COVID lockdowns, for example, the vaccine mandates,
Yes.
people now recognize more than 6 months ago, more than 12 months ago, more than 18 months ago, that these were things that were in violation of your civil rights, were not worth it, were not a good idea, were driven by public officials who thought they were a hell of a lot smarter than they actually are, who were not in every case as forthcoming as they should have been, right?
Right.
Who took extraordinary measures to drill a particular message down on the American people, at the expense of other voices that would have been beneficial. That overall it was managed with a complete disdain for our civil rights and the way that government should work. I think people now see that and are starting to realize that this and the other forms that authoritarianism takes are all of a bundle. And that's what provides a real opportunity for libertarianism and libertarians. So I'm excited to get out there and get the message out.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're right. And just speaking of COVID, that blind faith that Americans used to have in their institutions and everything like that. I think post COVID, that shit's out the window. Like whatever remaining
Yeah,
blind faith people had in those
yeah.
institutions, that is for a lot of people, most people, that is gone.
I think that is completely gone, and that's a good thing. I think it's a shame that there is so little trust. I don't think that's the American people's fault. I think that is the fault of the people who abused our faith and trust.
Yes.
And I think it's a real shame. I'm not one of those people, I'm not a complete anarchist in the sense that I think I'm not trying to say it's a good thing that nobody trusts anybody anymore, right? um, I want a police force we can trust.
Right.
I don't think we're there in every case. As much as I probably have a greater appreciation for police officers than most people just because of my experience, but I share my skepticism that things are run the way I wish they were.
Right.
I wish that we had a monetary policy we could trust, a fiscal policy we could trust. I wish all these things were true and that existed, but they don't and they aren't. And
Right.
we need to find a way to get back to a world in which we can trust each other a little bit more. but that necessarily means having systems in place like the founding fathers wanted, where there are checks and balances. uh, like Ronald Reagan used to say, trust but verify, right? Where
Right.
there's less power in the hands of politicians, so there's less incentive to abuse that trust. There's greater transparency, greater accountability. That's the directions in which we need to go.
Oh yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And yeah, just want to kind of start wrapping up here, man. I'm curious what I mean, what's next for you? What kind of big things do you have planned for your campaign in these next few months, next year? I mean,
Yep.
what are some big things that you're looking forward
We're
to?
going to the conventions.
Yes.
We're lined up in a dozen conventions in the spring already, and a dozen more we're lining up. So we're going to have a bit of a road show. I look forward to speaking to those state libertarian parties. In some cases, it's a Friday here, a Saturday there, and a Sunday someplace else. So it requires a little bit of travel budget and vitamin B. But getting out and meeting libertarians and talking to the delegates about the ideas that we have, it's what it's all about. And it provides its own energy. The energy that you need is met with the energy provided by working with such great folks who want the same things as you do and want to hear your ideas. So that's what the spring is going to be all about. As I said, we're onboarding some people to work on the campaign, so that's exciting. We'll be rolling out a fundraising program in the spring. We haven't asked anyone for a nickel yet, but we know that we need to do some of that.
Oh yeah.
We'll be getting more involved with public relations and media and the blocking and tackling of the campaign, but it will all revolve around this idea that we need a new relationship with our government. We need a gold new deal. We need to run a professional and credible campaign, and we need to do all of that in a way that differentiates us from the political duopoly in place today.
Oh man, I'm excited. I'm excited for you, man. I can't wait to see just what the campaign has in store, and what I don't just what all of that is going to look like. I absolutely cannot wait. And if
Thank you.
other people are like me and they want to keep up with you and everything like that, where can they find you? Throw out some social media handles, website, everything like that.
Well, yeah, go to Twitter and you can follow. It's at Termat Mike. You'd have to spell Termat right, which might be a challenge. TERMAAT. But you
Mhm.
could probably just search Mike Termat and get in the right place. We do have 3 websites up, 2 of which I'll plug now. The third one might not be quite ready for prime time. You can go to miketermat.com and goldnewdeal.org. goldnewdeal.org. It's not goldnewdeal.com. You can go to goldnewdeal.com if you want, but they'll try to sell you something. Which is not, and I'm not saying it's a bad idea to buy gold, right?
Right.
That's probably not a bad idea, but that's not what we're about. We're at goldnewdeal.org, but you can read about the campaign, see the videos, see the positions at miketermat.com.
Yeah, would highly recommend people follow you on Twitter and everywhere else, man.
And by the way, that's my real phone number in all of these places.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's the real deal. That's the phone I carry in my pocket. A couple of people have called. I don't know what they were expecting, but when I say hello, they're like, "Who's this?" And I'm like, "It's Mike. Who's this?" And they're like, "Well, I called because I got the number on your website." I'm like, "Okay, well, who'd you think you were calling, right?"
Yeah, it's not some
And
staffer or anyone like that. It's you.
exactly. And people on our team have asked me, shouldn't that number go someplace else, or shouldn't one of the other guys answer it or something? I'm like, how is that going to help me? If someone else answers it, they're going to end up texting me, saying, call this guy back. I mean, either way, I'm going to end up calling and
Oh yeah.
talking to whoever it is that calls. So I think that my approach is much more streamlined.
Oh, it definitely
So
is. Yeah, I mean, who better to talk to, than you about your campaign?
yeah, well, that's my attitude, and I I think so far it's been a lot of fun. I enjoy it. If someone wants to text me, I can call them back at a convenient time. But outside of that, you call that number, baby. You're talking to the real deal. So if you hate my guts, have your insult ready to go. And if you have a question, be ready to ask it because I'm answering.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure you'll have to deal with plenty of that over these next however many months. But Mike, thanks for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun to talk to you. And if I do decide to run for office in the future, you'll be the first guy that I call.
I doubt I'll be the first.
Well,
But
I'll call you. I'll call you
when you
sometime.
decide, you will call me. It's right. The number will be on the website.
Yeah,
So
I already
don't
have
tell
it.
me you don't know how.
Oh
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah. No,
You will
you're.
call and you'll say, I must have eaten something bad because my gut's telling me that I should run for office. What do you think? And I'll say, I'm flying out tomorrow. We'll discuss it at lunch.
Oh yeah. We'll have to wait and see what the future has in store for both of us then.
Well, that's right. As Humphrey Bogart said in Casablanca, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon and for the rest of your life.
It's a great quote to end it on. Mike, thanks for coming on the show, man. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you. You take care.
You too. Hey everyone, Taylor here, and thanks for listening to the Bonfire Briefing Podcast. My guest today is Tommy Brown III, and he's running for Washington County Commissioner in Indiana as a Libertarian. We wanted to do this episode for weeks, or maybe even months at this point, and boy, am I glad we got it done. We talked about his campaign, how he got into politics, fiscal issues facing Washington County, cybersecurity, education, protecting kids, and more. It was a great conversation. I know I had a really good time, and I can't wait to sit down with Tommy again before the election in November, which we definitely will do. Thanks for listening, and hope you guys enjoy. All right, we're good. Tommy Brown, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate you picking me up. It's like I told my last podcast host, we've been trying to do this for about 2 weeks, and every time we thought we got close, we hit a roadblock. But tonight's the night, so let's do her, buddy.
Yeah, tonight is the night, man. Yeah, no, I usually record on weekends, and I think I remember you saying that during the week was usually good for you, and then you hit me back up, and I mean, just so happened, I've got some free time, these next couple of evenings. So, I mean, I wanted to get you on because, you would, I had seen that you would like some stuff from the podcast in the past. And, it's pretty cool to talk to someone who's actually listened to my podcast before. I don't know. I've never asked anyone about it, but no, it's pretty cool. And I actually, it's really cool to talk to you specifically, because in my previous 2 episodes, I talked with Dan Berman, Dan Taxationist Theft Berman, and Marco Battaglia, who's running up for lieutenant governor in Iowa. And right. In both of those conversations, like a really big focal point of our discussion was just how important it was to, run for state, local, county level seats and to return the power to people in those kinds of positions. So it's pretty interesting to be talking to someone who is looking to do exactly that. You're running for a county commissioner in Washington County, Indiana. And I want you to just tell me a little bit about that, man. How's the campaign been going for you so far? How's life as a candidate? I mean, what's the whole experience been like for you up to this point?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, man. This campaign has been absolutely phenomenal. The reaction we're getting has been really, really upbeat. I've been very fortunate. This campaign alone, if you count this podcast with you, I have been on 13 podcasts just for this campaign.
Wow.
it's almost like it's not real at times. It's almost like it's a dream. You know, when I started this campaign was in its infancy the night of the results of the 2018 election. I was setting up the results, and I knew we wasn't going to win that night. And I was, in the back of my head, I was thinking, okay, that's my target. That's my target. And I told a friend of mine that was sitting right next to me, I was like, that's my target. And I said, I want you as my campaign manager. 3 weeks later, he calls me back. He goes, you got me. Let's do this.
Oh man, that's awesome. What did you run for in 2018?
I actually ran for county council as a libertarian in 2018. Ran against a guy that has been a lifelong family friend.
Oh wow.
Ben Bowling. Ben Bowling has known me since I was little, and I will tell you straight up that was probably one of the cleanest races that has ever been ran in Washington County. We did not cut into each other. We did not cut each other down. We stayed on the topics. We stayed on the facts. And I can tell you that was one of the funnest races I've ever been in.
Oh, I can imagine it was. What was the thing that caused you to run against him?
Just basically, it was a strong disagreement in policy and ideology. Mm-hmm. Once I got into the race, you know, there was just some things going on. In 2018, Washington County got a state mandate that they had to build a new jail, which at the time, I still don't agree with it. I didn't agree with it then because there's other ways to do stuff. You know, let's try home incarceration. You know, let's reduce the number of marijuana arrests. You know, there's things you can do to depopulate your jail.
Right.
Well, I went to the public meeting where they had the proposal to raise property taxes. The bold-faced lie that is now evident here in 2022, but it wasn't evident there, was that, oh, don't worry about it, the jail will pay for itself. Well, it's, you know, county government is not living up to what they said they was going to do. My opponent this time, who is current county commissioner, stated that night at the 2018 public meeting that, you know, we don't want dialogue with you. We're allowing you to voice your public opinion, but we're not going to answer any questions. And I'm sitting there, and I went up for my public comments that night, and I asked them, I was like, have any of you went out in your districts and talked to the people about what you're getting ready to do? Now, I had already been told they wasn't taking questions.
Right.
But, you know, I wanted to throw it back at them because if you go to the founding documents, taxation without representation is null and void. That property tax increase did not have any representation behind it.
Yeah, no, and that's well, what was the end result of all that? They got the property tax increase passed, and I'm guessing that didn't. I mean, did that pay for the new jail, or are y'all still? Y'all still dealing with that? I bet.
We are a community. We are a county of a little over 28,000 people. Mm-hmm. We have a property tax based bond debt of over 16.8 million.
Whoa.
We've got poverty rates that are above the state of Indiana levels. Right now, adult poverty level is up from 12.1 to 13.4. And the 18 and under poverty rate, now this is kids, is up from 17.7 to 18.0. And I have heard through some really reliable sources that it might be a little bit higher than 18%. They originally had told us that they was going to rent the beds out, bring in prisoners from outside the county that would pay for it. They're not renting the beds out. Now, that's really not in my spectrum for my race. I'm more concerned with the debt and how we deal with that debt going forward. There is a proposed budget on the table right now for 2023 for Washington County. They're asking for $11.9 million. And the only increase that I've heard reported that I agree with is for our EMS director.
Right. Yeah, no, that's no, I mean that well, what did you say the current debt was there again, just so I can
bond debt alone is over $16.8 million.
That's insane. I
Now,
mean, how does that happen? I mean, I'm just that's ridiculously high. I mean, how do you even get to that point?
Well, it's unfortunately, my opponent is a strong believer in the 1980s practice of tax and spend. Mm-hmm. I've said it many times. I'm going to continue to say it until somebody proves me wrong. They don't know how to manage their money. What they done is they took a large scale project and they finance part of it at 0% interest, which right there, that immediately, if you're any kind of person that studies economics, that right there for me sent red flags off like crazy. When I started digging, these bonds are absolutely backloaded with interest. And I'm talking interest rates of over 3%. 3% on $16 million. We're going to be paying for this jail upwards of into 2039. And the interest rate on those bonds is going to be anywhere between 3.38 and 3.50.
I mean, that's absurd. So, I mean, how do they justify wanting a $11.9 million budget that they're proposing now? I mean, how do they even justify asking for that much money in their budget when they've misappropriated so many funds and racked up all this debt? I mean, how do they even attempt to justify?
Well, what they would tell you is we don't have to go to the public for nothing. You elected us as our representatives, and we are doing what we see fit for the county. My response to that is, I hate to use this word, but I seen it earlier today in the Constitution Party's Facebook page. Mm-hmm. When a government decides that they can plunder their people and get away with it, that's exactly what's going to happen. Most of that money will come from the state of Indiana. The Indianapolis will have to approve the budget. Mm-hmm. I've glanced at the budget a time or two. The article in the paper today, the local Salem paper, that's where I found out about the pay increase for the EMS director. It's fairly reasonable because now in the state of Indiana, thanks to some law changes, there's going to be certain people with EMS that are going to have to file with the DEA because of narcotics. That goes back to the clamp down on narcotics and that kind of stuff, which is kind of out of my realm. But, that pay increase, I agree with. We're dealing with higher fuel costs. Most of the dump trucks and stuff that the county uses all run on diesel, so you're going to have higher fuel costs. But even with a $10,000 raise for the EMS director and a little bit higher fuel costs, I would venture to say there's probably probably some budget padding going on.
Right. Oh yeah, no, that's definitely not hard to imagine. Would not be a stretch at all. I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more, kind of broadly about Washington County, because I've never been. I Googled it here, but before we started talking. But I mean, are you from there, like born and raised, or?
Yeah, I was born here in Washington County. We are, like I said, we're a little over 28,000 people. We're situated about 40 miles north of Louisville, Kentucky, and we're situated about 90 miles south of Indianapolis. We're 20 miles, or actually, let me rephrase that. We're 17 miles from I-65, which runs through Scottsburg, Indiana, to the east of us. We've got some manufacturing in the county. We've lost quite a bit of manufacturing. Most, there's quite a few small businesses. Agriculture is really big in Washington County. We have a lot of farmers in the county. And those are the ones probably out of all of them that I worry about the most, because unfortunately my opponent has no insight and he has no foresight on how to reinvest back into the county. Hopefully here in a few minutes we can get into the economic policies that I have set forth. But that's kind of a basic rundown. For any basketball fans that listen to your podcast, got a little trivia for you you'll be interested in.
Ooh, all right.
One of the head coaches for the university or UCLA, Mr. Everett Dean, was actually born and raised here in Washington County in Salem, Indiana. So for any basketball buffs that know basketball, that name should resonate. Everett Dean was born and raised right here in Washington County. We're roughly about 40 miles away from Indiana University. So we've got some history. Matter of fact, Abraham Lincoln had one of our community members appointed to his staff, Mr. John Hay. He served in Lincoln's cabinet when Lincoln was president.
Well, that's pretty cool. The basketball one, I think will definitely that's a good one. The name rung a bell in my head. I couldn't quite place why, but that's pretty cool that he's from there.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about some of those issues, because we talked, very briefly before we started about, some of the top issues for you in this campaign. But if you could just tell me, what are some of the issues that you're focusing on in your campaign? What are voters telling you about?
Okay. Well, the first one, and probably the most important one, I have been following cybersecurity since 2016 with John McAfee. Mm-hmm. John was a huge inspiration to me. And when in 2016, when he ran for president, when he announced that we was already in a cyber war, that kind of got my wheels spinning. Well, I started researching it, and it's absolutely insane of how much of your daily life is consumed by cyber threats. Mm-hmm. And in my campaign here for county commissioner, I've stated it several times that Washington County needs a county commissioner in office, one that understands cybersecurity, but two, can bring forth a policy, which I have wrote myself, that will not only protect county infrastructure and county businesses, but will also protect the citizens of Washington County. And alongside that, will educate them. Now, I'm not talking about forced indoctrination or anything like that, or government-controlled education. Right. I'm talking about a county commissioner that is on social media daily, that has a social media presence, that is willing to share information that will benefit people and keep them safe online. My number one goal is to keep our children in Washington County safe from online threats. Our kids are vulnerable. And it's not just here in Washington County, that's nationwide. If you go to my Twitter page, which is at Tommy Brown III #1, you will see a lot of the cybersecurity I follow is based around keeping kids safe. So that's the cyber side of it. We've got to defend our county. Now, if you talk to my opponent about this, he will tell you that can't happen in Washington County. Our border will protect us from that.
Huh. Yeah, that's not a very satisfactory answer. I will say. Golly, I mean that's all he can muster up in response to questions about this.
Well, okay, when you are what I would consider the dominant party in the county, I guess you can be a little smug. I guess that's how you act, but to me that's wrong. That's another reason why I'm running, is to change the atmosphere within the county commissioner's seat. I've got video proof posted on my Facebook campaign page of my opponent using bullying tactics, literally snapping at other elected officials. And I'm sitting here thinking, wait a minute, you are an elected official of Washington County. The people trusted you to be the high-ranking commissioner, and you're going to go down to the bottom of the road and use bullying tactics to get something done. I'm sorry, that is not how our founding fathers seen elected officials. You're supposed to be a public servant, and you're supposed to be a statesman.
Right. Yeah, no, and it just, I mean, it sounds like he thinks he's above all of that for some strange reason, which is why I think it is so good that you're out, on social media all the time. I mean, I see your tweets all the time. I can't, I can't imagine what it's like for people that, live in Washington County and are following your campaign, closer. I mean, you're definitely doing a good job of, staying active and putting good information out there. I mean, that would be a great change of pace, compared to your opponent, or even, the rest of the county commissioners that, from what it sounds like, won't even talk to people, take questions from people. That's insane.
Well, here's what probably bothers me more than anything is we have a lot of, during the summertime, we can have, if severe weather hits, it sometimes can be pretty intense. My opponent absolutely will not post any severe weather information, nothing on public safety. And maybe it's my background. I spent 20 plus years serving both in Washington County and in Lawrence County, Indiana, for emergency management. Maybe it's my background. I have a heart for public safety. I want to make sure people are safe. And for an elected official to literally just slough it off and think, well, okay, they can fend for themselves, I'm going to stay home and do what I want. That's not being a public servant. I'm sorry. Somebody will probably argue with that fact. But if you can't take 2 minutes out of your evening and share from the National Weather Service that your county is under a tornado warning, why are you serving the people?
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. What did you say? It was emergency management you worked in?
Yes, I was. I started in 1997, and I stepped down January of this year, January of 2022. And I had close to 25 years in emergency management. And I learned a lot when I was there. That's probably why I'm so adamant about that, is because I spent 25 years doing it. Again, public safety has to be a high priority, especially when you are supposedly an elected public servant.
Right. And you talk a lot about public safety, and you mentioned it with cybersecurity too. I want to touch back on that just for a second, because I'm not a cybersecurity expert. But I was wondering, could you talk a little bit about some of the issues that that are facing Washington County, or something like that, as far as cybersecurity is concerned, and what threat that poses to people that live in the county, especially kids.
Okay. Let's start with business and go from there.
Mm-hmm.
Every business that's online, and to some point even citizens, right now there's two threats out there that are legitimate, and they can literally bankrupt a business, an individual, or a small county. The first one is ransomware. That is where they put a ransom against all of your computer information. The average cost of a ransomware attack right now, as of about 2 weeks ago, is over $640,000.
Holy shit.
That's a good reaction to that. That's probably one of the most controlled reactions I've heard. So when you take and you put that in perspective, so if a small county gets hit with a ransomware, they don't, and you're going to hear arguments either way. Do you pay the money? Do you not pay the money?
Right.
My thought is let's get a policy together. Let's help the businesses, the doctor's offices, the hospital, the individual, and the kids. Let's make sure that there's steps in place to keep them as safe as we can. Now, are we going to stop it completely? The honest answer to that is no. But having a policy in place and working with state and local officials to bring that to fruition is going to be a lot better than what we are doing now. I will say that I have to give our governor, Mr. Eric Holcomb, I got to pat him on the back a little bit. Earlier in 2021, I do believe, it might have been even this year, Indiana National Guard activated a cyber unit for the Indiana National Guard. Should I be elected to commissioner, I want to contact the commander of the Washington County unit here in our county, and I want to work with them, kind of give them a little extra practice, bolster them a little bit, get them out there in the news media, but at the same time, add another layer of security for Washington County and the people of Washington County by saying, hey, look, your local guard unit is helping your county commissioner defend you and educate you.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, the education is crucial. I feel like, I mean, if you have elected officials that are not educated on cybersecurity, how could they even begin to craft policy that would defend their constituents? They can't.
No, you're absolutely right. You can't. Now, the other threat that is out there, it's fairly new. It came out late last year. It's called extortionware. And this one kind of scares me a little bit. You get hackers that dig up dirt or make it up, either one. And they basically extort money from you, or else they release the information. Now, same rule applies that applies to ransomware. The money is no guarantee. Even if you pay the money, they could still do it. Right. Now, when I was on Tim O'Connor's podcast Saturday, he's like, you know what? He goes, some of the dirt that's come out on these elected officials, it doesn't seem to hurt them. I think I'd welcome it. It would make me more popular. I'm like, Tim, you really don't want to do that, brother. But, and okay, so we've covered that. Now let's focus on the kids. So look how often kids are online. Just when they're at home.
Oh,
We're getting ready. We are getting ready to start another school year. What guarantee does parents have that the schools are up to speed on cybersecurity? Yeah, I know they've got things in place. Okay, that's great. But I've always been taught when you stop learning, you stop living. And I cannot, as a human being, two, as a legitimate political candidate, I cannot sit back and say, oh, well, kids will be kids, you got to let them learn. No, the kids are our future. And if they are terrorized in the cyber world, and, we might as well face it, cyber is going to be the future. It already is here. There's not anything you hardly do that you're not touched by cyber. We've got to start educating them at a young age. I'm thinking, if we can get the schools to do it, I'm thinking starting like 3rd or 4th grade and increase that curriculum as they progress. My ultimate goal is to have one senior class while I'm in office work with me hand in hand to help defend the county. Now, if you tell me that's absurd, I'll believe it. But I think that would be a real big feather in the cap for any senior class. And it would be a pat on the back to the future of Washington County. And it would give the youth a feeling of belonging.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think you're absolutely right. And I like how you're thinking about, incorporating it into the curriculum, when they're younger. They always said that about foreign language, right? Like it's easier for a kid to learn foreign language if, you started a little earlier. I think the same is probably true about cybersecurity. You start teaching them this stuff when they're young, and they'll know what to look out for and how to stay safe. And I mean, like you said, it would just be a great overall skill for them to have. We actually got hit with the Zoom timer a couple minutes back. We've got about 6 minutes left before it closes out on us. I wanted to give you the last couple of minutes because you mentioned it, economic policy. It might have to be an abbreviated version of what you might give, but could you talk to us a little bit about, some of the economic policies that you're thinking about? And
okay. Just real quick, we have got to invest in jobs of tomorrow. We've got to build up our small business. As Ross Perot said in 1992, it's really simple, guys. You grow your job base, it grows your tax base. That's more revenue in the kitty. And that releases some of that pressure to raise taxes. We've got to also make positive effect upon our farmers and our agriculture. And we've got to start to think about moving to what I call an eco economy. We've got to be more ecological aware. There's a lot of good things out there that are coming. Solar is a really good renewable energy. Hydrogen fuel is the future. And, this country needs to revert back to what got it started by growing hemp. So that's kind of a really blunt overview of the economic policies. But if anybody contacts me via Twitter, via Facebook, I'll be glad to explain it to them in full.
Yeah, man, I've really appreciated our conversation. I think we might have to do it again. Felt like we were just scratching the surface on some stuff. I've really enjoyed it. I knew from, when we were talking before, I knew it'd be a good episode, man. Just, in the final minutes here, just want to give you an opportunity, let people know when your election is, how they can vote, any other stuff you want to plug, a website, your Twitter handle, anything like that. Just go ahead and throw it all out there.
All right, guys, the election is November 8th, 2022. I need thousands of you to show up and vote here in Washington County. You can check my campaign out on Twitter at Tommy Brown III, number 1, or if you're on Facebook, just simply type in Tommy Brown III for County Commissioner District 2, 2022. It's a public group. Feel free to join. I need support, and I always need help. And man, I appreciate you having me on tonight. This has been a blast, and we're definitely going to have to do this again before November.
Hey, I'm game. Let's do it. Tommy Brown, thanks for coming on the show, man. I've loved it. It's been awesome.
All right. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it, buddy.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Hey everyone, that was my conversation with Washington County Commissioner candidate Tommy Brown III. I had a great time, and I'm glad Tommy enjoyed being on the show too. This is definitely an episode we're going to have to run back at some point before the election in November. We talked about so many different issues facing Washington County, a place that I admittedly was completely unfamiliar with beforehand. I'm wishing Tommy the best of luck on the campaign trail, and if you live in his district, which is District 2 in Washington County, Indiana, be sure to vote for Tommy Brown III. You can check him out on Twitter at Tommy Brown III and learn more about him. Speaking of Twitter, if you enjoyed that episode, be sure to follow at Bonfire Brief Pod so you don't miss future episodes like this one. Thanks for watching.